Okay, so we are gonna continue our new session on the limits, actually the terms of negotiation, and we have a selected group of historians that are going to present today. So I'm sharing the screen. Is this one?
Yep.
This one? Okay, so Guillaume.
Gracias, Alexandre. Okay. Buenas tardes, good afternoon or good night. Pues yo voy a presentar en español porque era así en el título y como sabes mi español castellano es universal, se puede entender en muchas partes gracias a este acento que es totalmente trabajado, como sabéis. Pero hice el PowerPoint en francés, así que creo que vamos a conseguir una comprensión, ¿verdad? Pierre-Emmanuel y Paola también, pero creo que Elsa habla español, ¿o lo entiende? Sí, pues voy a presentar un proyecto con primeras ideas de lo que estoy haciendo ahora y voy a empezar a recordar un contexto que conocéis todos, incluso que habéis ya escrito para algunos, pero me parecía bien volver a situar el contexto. Pues estamos en 1571 y los hispánicos, una mayoría de vecinos de México, conquistaron a la ciudad de Manila, una ciudad portuaria que en aquella época era liderada por jefes tradicionales recientemente convertidos al Islam, parientes del sultán de Brunei. Manila se volvió en pocos años el centro de un comercio entre China y Nueva España, una historia bien conocida, ¿no? Es la del galeón de Manila o nao de China. Siguiendo un fenómeno comparable a lo que estudió o identificó Sanjay Subrahmanyam para el Océano Índico y los portugueses, los hispánicos se integraron en redes comerciales ya existentes. La diferencia es que estos hispánicos tenían grandes cantidades de metal de plata, d'argent, la plata es el argent, importado de Nueva España. Desde entonces el modelo, pero podemos discutir de la palabra, de un emporium, se dice en español, empuries, como aquí. Un emporio cosmopolita sureste asiático se impuso. En Manila ya tuvimos varios ejemplos. Se encontraron varias naciones, como se decía en aquella época. Cada año, como sabéis, champanes de la región de Minnan, la parte sur de la provincia de Fujian, aprovechaban de la monzón para dirigirse a la feria de Manila, ¿no? Entre marzo y junio. Rápidamente una comunidad de varios miles de individuos se formó. Algunos se quedaban solo el tiempo de la feria, mientras que otros se instalaron con familia, muchas veces con mujeres, hombres chinos y mujeres autóctonas, indígenas. Los mercaderes del Minnan contaban con una larga tradición marítima, ¿no? de comercio y de conocimiento marítimo. Y esto le permitió desarrollar una red comercial en el sureste asiático, desde el estrecho de Malaca hasta Japón. Un especialista como Leonard Bluset habló, como sabéis, de un imperio informal. Wang Gungwu habló de Merchants Without Empire, para hablar de este fenómeno diaspórico, otro término que podríamos discutir, fenómeno comercial. Birgit utilizó el concepto de triangular trade entre Filipinas, China y Japón. Y los libros de Maneloye, especialmente el último, ¿no? Trata de este mismo tema, islas de plata, imperios de seda, juncos y galeones en los mares del sur. Recuerdo también otra referencia de Lucille Chia hablando de Chinese Sojourners, toda una serie de trabajos que constituyen, por supuesto, referencias para mi trabajo. Esta comunidad de mercaderes chinos infieles, para utilizar los términos de las fuentes, pues esta comunidad está bien presente a lo largo del periodo que yo estudio, es decir, un largo siglo XVII, pero no, no incluye a todos los individuos y grupos vinculados a China y que viven en Manila y sus alrededores. Me refiero a los agricultores, artesanos, taberneros, transportistas, marineros, obreros del sector de la construcción, de los arracenes, ¿cómo se dice? Construcción de barcos. Atarazanas, eso, gracias. Pues todas estas personas forman un mundo compuesto de varias orígenes. No soy especialista, pero entendí que, por ejemplo, en las fuentes nunca se encuentra la palabra Fujian. En realidad se refieren al origen de ciudades, ¿no? Se saben más o menos, si los españoles hablan de Chicheo para hablar de dos ciudades diferentes. A veces, como sabéis, sale la palabra Anay, que se refiere a otra ciudad, pero no hay un origen así bien identificado por los dos lados, pero podemos discutir también. Pues un mundo compuesto de varios orígenes, de elecciones religiosas, de elecciones matrimoniales, de varios idiomas y de toda una serie de manifestaciones culturales. Como sabéis también, las autoridades hispánicas designaron muy temprano un barrio para estos chinos de las fuentes. Y lo hicieron bajo el modelo andaluz de la alcaicería. Pues eso lo conocemos, pero y lo que voy a decir también lo sabemos, es que este mundo compuesto de varias poblaciones se ubicó también en varios barrios fuera del Parián, de esta alcaicería tan conocida. Se encontraron también chinos en las provincias cercanas, la Pampanga, Laguna de Bay y otras islas del archipiélago. Las órdenes religiosas, especialmente los dominicos, se encargaron de la evangelización. La historia de los chinos de Manila está conocida a través de las referencias ya mencionadas y también por el libro de Juan Gil, de 2011, Los chinos en Manila, siglos XVI y XVII, una extraordinaria herramienta de trabajo que se fundamenta en su mayoría en el Fondo Contadurías del Archivo General de Indias. Los temas principales de este libro son comercio, fiscalidad y las instituciones de gobierno de la comunidad y también contiene toda una serie de documentos. Lo tengo aquí si alguien lo quiere consultar. Pesa mucho, me ha costado llevarlo desde Toulouse. Pues sí, mi proyecto, bueno, eso era un poco el paisaje muy general, pero el proyecto básicamente sería de hacer una historia social de la construcción o fábrica, no sé si se utiliza en español, de esta comunidad o de estas comunidades, no tengo respuesta, a partir de 3 temas, pero no están cerrados. Si tenéis ideas, puedo incluirlas. Pues primero, la instalación de los chinos en Manila y su región. Yo incluiría el tema de la ¿cómo se dice? De la construcción urbana o más bien del aménagement, ¿cómo sería? La urbanización, la construcción, las puentes, canales, etcétera, pues necesarios para acoger esta gente y participaron los chinos a esta construcción. Me refiero también a las actividades artesanales, agrícolas, de pesca, comercial y de transporte. Las actividades de los grandes mercaderes que participaron al comercio del galeón están bastante bien conocidas, ¿no? Pero las fuentes, existen fuentes menos estudiadas que nos enseñan el abanico, ¿no?, de oficios y actividades necesarias a la vida de los habitantes de Manila, cualquier sea el origen de estas personas. La organización de los gremios, el número y la condición de los trabajadores, esclavos, salariados, dependiente, independiente, constituyen temas poco estudiados. También el tema, sí, del Parián, pero de estos otros barrios, Baybay, Binondo y Tondo, el puerto de Cavite y estas provincias ya mencionadas, pues me parece que es importante abarcar el conjunto, ¿no? Y no solo Parián. Creo que habéis entendido. Pues también habría que, para entender de manera conjunta, habría que añadir lo que se ha hecho, pero es complicado por tema de fuentes, la dimensión diaspórica del fenómeno con los vínculos que se mantienen entre la provincia de Fujian y Manila, su región, y las implicaciones demográficas, sociales y culturales para los residentes chinos de Manila. El segundo punto, pues entendéis que la primera parte sería más una presentación de lo que sabemos de la organización espacial y social de la ciudad. El segundo punto sería el tema de la transformación o transformaciones y adaptaciones medioambientales. Me refiero al hecho de que Manila no tenemos cifras exactas de cuántos habitantes hay a tal fecha, porque cambia mucho según por temas de masacres también, pero sabemos, hay una cifra que sale mucho, que es de 20.000 sangleyes chinos en 1600 y suele decirse que había 2.000 españoles también en la ciudad. Yo no tengo datos para el número de población indígena en Manila, pero puedo imaginar que había tantos como sangleyes, ¿no? Era una ciudad, pero eso es muy general, ¿no? Pero algo como 40.000, que representa para esa época una ciudad muy grande. Pues la variación demográfica es también un tema de interés, ¿no? Pues esta extensión urbana provoca una cuestión del abastecimiento de la ciudad que implicó el desarrollo del cultivo de arroz en toda la región y también de ganadería, ¿no? De ganadería, y daré un ejemplo después. Son dos fenómenos poco conocidos o de lo que he leído. A esto habría que añadir el papel de los ríos y del mar por el tema de pesca y de transporte y comunicación. Hay otra cosita que me interesa en este segundo punto, es el corte de madera. Corte de madera, ¿ça va? Pierre-Manuel? ¿Cómo? Ok, c'est la coupe du bois. Pues sí, me di cuenta que los sangleyes chinos participaban a la construcción de barcos, pero también en la construcción civil de los edificios en la ciudad, y daré ejemplos de corte de madera por sangleyes. Sabemos ya que varios eran carpinteros que formaban un gremio. Así hay una relación entre corte de madera y presencia china en Manila. Pues también nos enseña las interacciones con las poblaciones locales, porque la madera se iba a buscar en estas provincias de la Laguna y Pampanga. Este tema también permite abarcar el de la explotación de la mano de obra o no, o si eran pagados y bien pagados, ¿no? El tema de la explotación pues, nos lleva a lo de las resistencias asociadas y también la explotación de los recursos naturales en este mundo tropical, lo que permitirá comparaciones con otras regiones, tanto en China como en América, pero eso es una ambición un poco demasiada, ¿no? Tercer punto, tercera idea, es lo que voy a presentar hoy, me viene de lo que he trabajado para el Imperio Español y que vimos contigo, Alexandre, la importancia de estos procuradores que muchas veces llevan súplicas o peticiones, memoriales, etc. Pues, como sabéis, para los especialistas del mundo hispánico, ibérico, pues son documentos muy importantes, ¿no? Los archivos están llenos de peticiones, de memoriales, de personas o grupos que piden algo. Y es un tema también para Europa, ¿no? Y Simona Cerutti es parte de sus trabajos y me pareció que utilizar sus ideas podría ser un punto de partida para una investigación sobre una comunidad, ¿no? Porque ella trabajó los extranjeros en Italia a partir de este tipo de documento. Pues la idea está aquí puesto en francés, es bastante transparente, pero voy a tratar de traducir. Que una petición entonces es una acción que en cierta medida asigna estatutos, ¿no? Y asigna también calidades individuales o grupos, ¿no? El hecho de poner una petición en realidad significa que el uno tiene que posicionarse y es una acción que crea una realidad social. Pues dice también que las súplicas tienen como efecto de trabajar, es lo que decía, las identidades sociales, de construir las fisionomías y los límites de los grupos sociales. Pues a partir de esto hay otros estudios sobre este tema, pero me pareció bien interesante. Traté de juntar un grupo de peticiones presentadas por sangleyes entre 1580 y 1680. Estas peticiones son de una gran riqueza, tanto sobre su forma, seguro que ya conocéis algunas, y por la retórica desplegada, la calidad de los peticionarios, de los solicitantes, algunos que son líderes de la comunidad, cabeceras de gremios o individuos, muchas veces ordinarios, ganaderos, pescadores, etc. Pues voy a distinguir los dos tipos de peticiones, ¿no? También estas peticiones pueden ser interesantes por lo que dicen los temas de petición, ¿no? El tema de las restricciones de desplazamiento en la ciudad y alrededor de Manila, las actividades, el tema de la creación de una caja de comunidad, que me parece algo muy interesante y fuerte, aunque tenemos pocos datos. Tema de propiedad, de excesos, como se decía, de los españoles, y entonces de la posición de víctima de estos solicitantes. Sí. Creo que el segundo punto que me interesó, voy a presentar el corpus de fuentes. Pues hay varias que ya se publicaron. Hay una que es muy conocida porque incluso creo que en el Archivo General de Indias es patrimonio de la humanidad porque lleva caracteres chinos. Es la primera referencia con un intento de traducción al inglés de la versión china del documento, una petición de 1598. Y la segunda es un documento, un artículo reciente que permite vislumbrar el hecho de que hay peticiones desconocidas, ¿no? Que están en archivos, y aquí Regrado Trota José publicó documentos del archivo de los agustinos de Valladolid, ¿no? En los cuales hay peticiones un poco menos conocidas, pero voy a explicar un poquito. Pues es un cuadro que no entraba me dice dos, ¿no? Bueno, pero no son muchas, veis que no tengo tanto trabajo, son 11 peticiones en total. Eso serían las peticiones colectivas, ¿no? De grupos, ¿ok? Y luego tengo otras individuales. La primera es un poco, sí, es una petición, pero es más la prueba de una carta que nos habla de una petición. Tengo la segunda también, es una cédula real que nos dice, he sido informado por los sangleyes que y bueno, no siempre tengo las peticiones en sí. Bueno, solo para explicar un poco el cuadro, tenéis la fecha, luego la persona o el grupo, mejor, de solicitantes, y he puesto un poco aquí en grande la manera con la cual se presentan, ¿no? Chinos de mitón, indios sangleyes, chinos cristianos e infieles, etcétera. Sangleyes y nada, sangleyes cristianos y mestizos de Binondo y Babay, sangleyes mercaderes, etc. Pues uno de los puntos que me gustaría desarrollar es la cuestión de la asignación de una categoría, que es la de sangley, y ver que no es un poco más compleja que solo sangley, como los documentos hablan de este grupo y cómo, si posible, estos mismos hablan de sí. Pues, por ejemplo, sangleyes cristianos y mestizos. ¿Significa que son cristianos y mestizos, o pueden ser sangleyes cristianos y sangleyes no cristianos y mestizos? Bueno, todo creo que queda por hacer, todo un trabajo así un poco filológico, pero también de la cuestión si hay veces se puede saber cómo se presentaban a sí mismos. Estamos hablando de los testimonios en historia, a veces en declaraciones se pueden ver. Pues esta es también una constatación, es que hasta muy tarde, ¿no? Me imagino que sí, Ana conoce muy bien las últimas, estos sangleyes infieles siguen, aunque no son súbditos de los reyes de España, siguen utilizando la petición más que los locales, ¿no? Pero creo que eso es una cosa de archivo y fuentes, porque estamos hablando de fuentes o de documentos que llegaron a España, que le interesaba al rey, y pienso que todo lo que era local se quedó en lo local, y desafortunadamente, como sabéis, la documentación local no existe más. Entonces no significa que los sangleyes cristianos no hacían petición, pero me imagino que no aparecen tanto. Sí, luego a quién se dirigen, veis que es básicamente el rey y el gobernador. Bueno, son los dos destinatarios de las peticiones, y los temas son mucho de vejaciones, se quejan mucho. Pero hay una que es súper interesante de 1609, piden fundar una nueva caja de comunidad, significa que tenían una antes, que desapareció con el masacre de la revuelta, etc. Y hay varios documentos sobre la caja de comunidad que están en el libro de Juan Gil, ¿no? que transcribió. Hay un elemento que no aparece muy bien, es el papel de los religiosos. Muchas veces son procuradores, y entonces estos documentos son poderes para los dominicos, en realidad, doctrineros del Parián. Pues detrás de esto hay toda una retórica, una terminología muy se ve que probablemente los dominicos tienen la pluma también, es cierto, pero bueno, es más complicado que esto, pienso yo. Pues habrá un trabajo de ver quién hace qué, o decir que lo hicieron juntos, porque hay un dato que no está aquí. tal vez lo habéis visto, es que muchas veces esto es el resultado de una junta. Se juntan en una iglesia de los reyes, muchas veces dice, y pues están juntos y deciden juntos, ¿no? Y firman las cabeceras, los más importantes, y dicen, estábamos cientos, pero firmaron 20 y aparecen las firmas o no. Hay 2 o 3 documentos en los cuales aparecen las firmas. Y me permite ir hacia esto, que me fascina, pero estoy un poco descubriendo esto porque me ha costado mucho encontrar referencias sobre las peticiones en el mundo chino Ming, a ver si funcionaba. Estas peticiones correspondían a prácticas chinas, ¿no? Pues encontré finalmente el artículo que buscaba de este Richard Lufrano, Cherishing the People and Enriching the Dynasty, Officials and Non-Elite Petitioners in Late Ming Jiangnan. And he says something about those petitions in the Ming at the same, hablo inglés, at the same period, al mismo tiempo que parece a lo que se encuentra en las peticiones de Manila, ¿no? They always petition as a group, usually according to occupation or residence, rather than as individuals. A list of names concluding with the words "and other" would precede the petition, etc. Sometimes a list of names will be inscribed at the end of the inscription. Las peticiones que conservamos con firmas en carácter chino corresponden a esta descripción. La diferencia es que las fuentes que utiliza Richard Lufrano son, ¿cómo se dice? De estelas, piedras grabadas.
Estelas, sí.
Estelas, ¿no? En las cuales la piedra viene a decir, ok, hemos aceptado la petición y es como tiene fuerza de ley, ¿no? Y se ponían, por ejemplo, por temas mucho de tierra, eran peticiones para defender el derecho a la tierra, por ejemplo, y se ponían en el paisaje, ¿no? Pues tengo que seguir trabajando sobre esta comparación, pero como es la petición, como decía, es un fenómeno bien conocido para mí, para el mundo hispánico, creo que hay un terreno de encuentro para utilizar lo de Richard White, no sé, pero son documentos que hablaban a los dos mundos, ¿no? Pues es un ejemplo de la potencialidad de este tema. Hay otras cosas que se pueden comparar y que tendré que hacer. Pues sí, por ejemplo, se podría comparar lo que decía de la retórica, de los argumentos que utilizan, que podrían, no sé si son culturales o es más fácil para mí decir ahora cultural, el tema del bien común, del interés común, ¿no? El tema de la religión, cómo uno justifica el maltrato que recibe o cómo se pone en víctima, el servicio del rey, la lucha contra la corrupción. Y aquí también, de lo que he leído en este artículo, creo que hay correspondencias, ¿no? Entre estos documentos. Ya hablé de esto y termino. ¿Quién controla la mesa? ¿Tú, Alexandre?
Yo, pero no estoy controlando nada. Así que
estás descontrolado.
Tengo que confesar.
Ok. Y ahora, bueno, eso era el primer grupo, peticiones colectivas, hay pocas. Pero en el libro de Juan Gil aparecen súplicas, peticiones individuales o más pequeñas, puntuales, que encontró en contaduría y yo encontré en pleitos otras. Y me imagino que se puede formar un grupo bastante consistente para decir algo, ¿no? Pues os doy algunos ejemplos de la riqueza de estas peticiones que pueden permitir esto de lo que decía Cerruti, de ver cómo se forman comunidades, grupos, cómo se presentan a los oficiales españoles, lo que piden, etc. Y también lo que dice el documento, es decir, la vida social en Manila. Pues este es un ejemplo de transporte marítimo de madera por un sangley que transporta estas cargas de madera, un maderero. Memorial de Agustín Tejuan, sangley cristiano, cabeza de maderero. Je peux le traduire en français puisque les Espagnols lisent l'espagnol, non? Donc j'ai besoin d'un sampan pour charger du bois depuis Rancheria, c'est une ferme, quoi. Et ça veut dire qu'il a un élevage de batangas, donc esto de las otras comarcas alrededor, de la juridiction de Balayan, et de les amener au Parian des Sangleyes pour les travaux de cette république, particulièrement le chantier de l'église du Parian que nous sommes en train de faire. Pues este trabajo, tenemos un poco más datos, significa que este señor tiene una ganadería, ya lo sabíamos, pero poco a poco con este tipo de documentación podríamos imaginar un mapa de esta vida social. Y es sangley cristiano, cabeza de madereros, eso era más para esto lo que decía, asignación, he puesto las comillas porque habla la primera persona, ¿verdad? Y la primera parte es lo que dice el oficial, ¿no? No es una presentación, no se dice sangley cristiano el mismo. Y muchas veces vienen con este documento, que es una copia, en realidad no es una copia, pone firmado con carácter chino. Entonces el original llevaba la firma y se puede imaginar que venía con la petición ya hecha pidiendo a un escribano, no sé qué, pues nos lleva al tema de ayer, de intérpretes, etc., ¿no? Otro ejemplo que me gusta mucho, pâturage de sangleyes, de ganadero de vacas lecheras, ¿verdad? Se dice así en español, del norte de Manila. Y el tema de la petición es el de el problema, ¿cómo se llama? El gobernador prohibió la circulación de los sangleyes fuera del Parián, pero él tiene que alimentar a sus vacas, ¿verdad? Entonces tiene que ir a cortar hierbas que se llaman zacate. En la fuente se puede encontrar zacate incluso hoy en día, y zacate es una palabra náhuatl para una suerte de hierba. Sí, yo también estaba sorprendido, pero es una palabra náhuatl. Entonces, sí, hay este tema de también significa, pues hay que leerlo varias veces para estar seguro, pero que las vacas estaban en la ciudad y que él tenía que ir a cortarlas. Y como sabéis, la leche no se puede transportar, y es mejor tener la vaca cerca que lejos. Y no es un refrán, pero puede ser, no sé. Una última. Patrón de batelier. Ah, oui, esto es los chinchoreros. Es bonito porque hay también la respuesta del sargento mayor. Memorial de Bartolomé Pemo, cabeza de chinchoreros. Por mí, y en nombre de todos, digo que siempre chinchorero, donc c'est des petits bateaux. Donc j'ai toujours eu avec moi, m'ont aidé 4 calfateurs pour faire les coques des bateaux, là, des sampans de chinchorero. Il y en a plus de 100. Mais ils sont, voilà, en gros, ils sont partis, j'en ai plus, donc je demande à récupérer mes 4 calafates, et on a leur nom, Jacinto Bagui, Teno, Sako, Ikaoko. Et là, il y a le sergent-major qui fait son rapport et son informe para el gobernador, para que tome la décision. C'est juste des gens qui se capa de ladrones, c'est des voleurs, quoi. Enfin, c'est un métier pour cacher qu'ils sont voleurs. En particulier ce monsieur, Bartolomé Pemo, et comme tous les gens de son métier, quoi. Pues esto nos lleva a las percepciones de las autoridades, pues eso es muy típico, ¿no? del discurso de los españoles sobre este tipo de gente. Pues tengo más. Termino rápidamente sobre la metodología, pero creo que habéis entendido. Básicamente es tratar de cruzar, de relacionar las historiografías en términos de comparación, pero también un poco conectada, y también realmente enfocarse en la... Pues no sé si es un voto así... un deseo ingenuo, pero interesarse en la vida social en sí, de manera un poco básica, lo que pasa en esta ciudad, sin venir demasiado con una historiografía de lo intercultural o etcétera, pero más interesarse en el trabajo, los intercambios, abastecimiento, etcétera. Bueno, para finalmente ver qué era esta ciudad. Estoy consciente que estoy tratando de un siglo y que la ciudad cambia, por supuesto, pero hacemos con las fuentes. Y también termino, lo juro, con esta idea de ambigüedad, ¿no? Que se utiliza en sociología cuando hay varias partes. Son trabajos clásicos de Harrison White, no sé si funcionarán, espero. Pero la idea de ambigüedad es que la ambigüedad es necesaria para mantener una suerte de paz social, ¿no? Porque el contrario de la ambigüedad sería la norma. Existen normas, ¿no? Leyes para sangleyes, ¿no? Hispánicas. Pero esto, la ley, como no tiene mucho matiz, pues si se aplica puede llevar pues sí, a conflictos, ¿no? Y la idea sería un poco buscar estos momentos de negociación o de ambigüedad, etcétera. Pues tal vez es significativo, ¿no? Hay español, dice, tú me estás hablando como chinchorrero, pero sé que tú eres un ladrón, en realidad, ¿no? Te estás escondido, y él pues no pide algo extraordinario, ¿no? Solo que para sus barcos necesita personas que las labran con estos calafates. Bueno, veis que estoy un poco al principio de esto, pero hay muchas lecturas y fuentes para encontrar, pero básicamente sería la idea. Os agradezco por la atención.
Muchísimas gracias, Guillaume. No sé si podrá tenerte el tiempo, ¿no? Pero es igual, ha estado muy bien. Entonces, ¿ya hemos dejado de compartir?
¿Sí? Yo... merde, qu'est-ce que j'ai fait?
Porque...
No. J'ai appuyé sur el chat.
Siguen aquí, ¿no? Ah, sí, están aquí, qué bien. Qué susto. Pensaba que os habíamos perdido. A veces tocamos cosas que no debemos tocar. Muy bien, pues entonces vamos a dar la bienvenida a Elsa CLAVÉ, que es la siguiente ponente. Entonces, Elsa, cuando quieras, creo que vas a compartir pantalla, ¿verdad?
Have you received it?
Not yet.
Okay. Maybe I can start to talk without the PowerPoint, because the first minute does not need a PowerPoint. And I would like to explain how I came to that project, because in fact I started to be interested in treaties, the big treaties, and I wanted to understand problem of translation and concept. And very quickly I hit the wall, because I could not find what I wanted to read. I could not find the treaties in both languages, and sometimes I found, let's say, the answer to my questions, because my question was like, how did they translate, and why did they use that terms to translate sovereignty? Did they really understand? And then I read that some Europeans say, well, if there is a difference between the two treaties, it's normal, and if there is any differences, just hold on our version. So in a way, it kind of solved, let's say, the question that I had, because the problem of translation was accepted de facto. But I still had in my mind another question, which was, what came after the treaties? In which way those treaties, which drew borders, changed the life of people? So maybe not a bit like Guillaume just explained, those people that were living far from the city, far from the port, in which way it really impacted them. And that's how I came to be interested with land deeds and land certificates, because after the treaties, which are not very detailed sometimes about, okay, we have the borders, but we don't know what's going to change in the life of common people. Then we have the administration coming, And before, let's say, the setup of a full-fledged administration, we have maybe this ambiguity, this space where you have a rule, but it's not applied for everybody. There is the old rule, the new rule, the in-between. And that's precisely what I would like to talk about today, through the example of land certificates that have been produced by the Sultanate of Johor in the southern tip of the Malay Peninsula. And I will start by a quote without you reading the quote, but maybe you don't need that. And it's that, in theory, we take this statement for true that traditionally people in Malaysia could use the land if it was not cultivated before. That was the domain of the Sultan. And that is something which indeed is true. But we also considered that the individualization of land started with the British colonial administration in the 19th century. And that is not true. If we look at the document, the individualization of ownership started in the 18th century and with Malay rulers. But which is true, so it's a pity you cannot read this wonderful quote, is that it started indeed for commercial agriculture. So yes, we started in the Malay Peninsula to produce certificates and to have a more individual understanding of land use for commercial agriculture, but it did not happen in the late 19th century with the British, but in the early 18th century with the Malay. And this is, of course, the development of a historical process. It happened because things change, and I will explain briefly what. It involved different communities, and it also brought to the establishment of different systems of land use. It was not just one, but different. So again, thank you for this beautiful terms of ambiguity. There was not one norm, but several norms. So we have this things moving around, let's say. And with those systems came also negotiations. And when I say negotiation, I don't think of something like commercial or economical negotiation, but cultural negotiations. And that's what I call negotiation on paper, because it's not about two people talking to each other and trying to agree what terms are they going to use, because we are not here when those conversations happen and we don't know if they happen, but we have the result. And we see that the result is really the result of cultural transaction or negotiations between different norms. And that's what I would like to present today, this historical process, the different communities, and through different land certificates, this example of cultural and legal negotiations that happen within a territory that I should emphasize was largely regulated by British law. So that is important because we are not outside of the British domain, we are somehow inside, but not totally under its regulation. I would love to show you a map.
I think I have the presentation here.
Do you think you have received the? Maybe it was very heavy with the picture.
I think it's gonna help if we can use it. Yeah.
Yes, you have it. Wonderful. So maybe it's the slide. The third slide, probably.
Okay, now let me see if I can just fix it. Okay, it is here.
Okay.
Now, I'll go to where? Here? No. Here? No. Where it is? Here?
The first one.
Yeah, and third slide. So that
this
two
one?
more slides.
Can you see that now?
Yes, I can. I can see.
Okay,
so if you can,
so you
can move, that's the quote that I was commenting. If you can move once, So that's the quote that I was commenting. That is what we find in the literature, and this hold for true. And I am pretty sure that the second part is not correct. by 1 century and the people to whom we should attribute this individualization of land. And now we can move to the third slide. Yeah, so that's basically, we cannot see it. Yeah, that's true. Paola said that the people online cannot see it. We see, yeah, they don't see it. We see you and the screen behind, but it's not shared.
We're going to fix it now.
You try to imagine.
Yeah, so it's basically what I just said before, that I consider this land certificates as cultural and legal products that shows the negotiation that happened between communities after treaties were signed, or sometimes the same moment, but they are different type of negotiations.
I think now you all can see the screen, right? Okay.
Yeah.
Gracias.
Thanks.
And one thing that I forgot to say is that those land certificates, the way I've been working on is having a close look at them, of course. And I compare them with everything that I know in the Malay world. So yesterday we talked about Malay letters in Maluku. And I compare them with that. I compare them also with other treaties that we have. And I have to say that sometimes I could find a lot of similarities. The difference is that they are written in all one language, and that's important. We don't have translation and we don't have two versions. It's always one language. And I think that makes a big difference in terms of negotiation on paper, because now we don't have two groups that say, oh, I have my version and I hold that version for true. We have just one version and everybody have to agree. And as we will see, those papers were made between two groups, but in fact, they needed to be recognized by three groups. Just a moment. I hope it's not too noisy. So next slide, please. I am bringing you now in the western part of Southeast Asia, in the Straits of Malacca, southern tip. So in the sultanate called Riau Johor Lingga, very long name for a sultanate that has a complex history, and basically the name represents the three circles. Riau is the middle circle, Johor is up to Singapore in the first circle, and the one down represents the island of Lingga. Very briefly, what is Riau Johor Lingga? It's the sultanate that came after Malacca. When the Portuguese took Malacca, the sultan flew in Johor and basically founded the Sultanate of Johor. And this sultanate really grew and tried to do what it could with the Portuguese around, and strive and was doing quite well until 1699, where we have this dynastic rupture. And it's major because the sultan died, he does not leave any heir. And then we have a feud and people fighting because without, let's say, a clear descendant from the Sultan of Malacca, everybody can claim some right on the throne. One of the person tried to find some ally and called Bugis. Bugis are warriors, seafarer coming from the island of Sulawesi. Those Bugis arrived in 1722, and it's extremely important, not just because after they basically take over the Sultanate and their lineage take over the Sultanate, but because when they arrive, they help the Sultan. There is a change in the political structure because after that we have two heads, one Malay, one Bugis. But most importantly, and I have no idea why, they bring Chinese agriculturalists. And at that moment, they come, you can see maybe down there is an island, Bangka, which is east of Sumatra. And this island in Bangka is where you have Chinese miners coming in about the same moment. So we don't really know why the Bugis bring those Chinese. They invite them to come, and they invite them to come to start gambir and pepper plantations. Gambir was known as a tanning agent. It was cultivated, but only by indigenous people. It has never been, let's say, cultivated in such a scale for commerce. And that's the first moment, basically, where we have plantation, Chinese plantation, owned by Malay and Bugis. Unfortunately, we don't have any document from that period. We don't know if they were issuing any land certificate, but we know that it was owned under, let's say, the control of Bugis and Malay, because we have a Malay chronicle, the Tufat al-Nafis, who explain a little bit about it. And we have sources from the Dutch, but they are later sources from 1818, 1820, that explain a little bit about those plantations and how the Chinese were organized. But at that period, the Malay and the Bugis had already left. Why they had left? Because there was a growing tension with the Dutch, and in 1784, the Dutch attacked Riau, completely destroyed the center, and during 10 years, the Malay and the Bugis left, and as you see, this sultanate is quite widespread. We have a lot of islands where we can go, and basically they left the center of Riau, and they went somewhere else. So during 10 years, we have no more Malay and Bugis. We don't know what's happened, but a few Chinese continue to stay there, continue to cultivate things, and the other follow the Malay, and they go to Singapore. So Singapore is where you have the small star. They go to Singapore. 10 years after the Dutch leave, they could have come back to Riau, but at the same time, more or less, the British arrive, and where you have the star, you have Penang, you have Malacca. They arrive and they start to take settlements, so they divert the trades. So even coming back 10 years after, it was complicated for the Malay to regain their position. The Bugis came back, but the Malay were looking for other revenue, and they stayed in Singapore and Johor. And as I said, we already had Chinese agriculturalists starting plantation there. Next slide, please. What happened in Singapore is short-lived, and we don't really know if what we name the country system happened there or after. Basically, the Chinese left Singapore in 1840 because there was very quickly a problem of land, and you will see why. And the British tried to regulate, so they did not leave that ambiguity. They tried to put their rule, and the Chinese say, no, we just go to Johor because the Sultan there have, let's say, other type of rule. Johor is a Malay state. You have a Malay at the head. I call him a Sultan, which is partly mistaken. He's a Tumenggung, and a Tumenggung is another title. And basically, there was no Sultan in Riau, being quite complicated. You don't have one head, but you have, let's say, 4 different heads of states, which complexified a lot of things where you sign treaties. But the Tumenggung was the one that was in charge of foreigners, that was in charge of land, and that was in charge of the city, not the ports, but the rest. And what is interesting is that in Johor, he established a system. So scholars call it the Kangchu system. They probably did not call it like that. At least we don't have that in the documents. But they talk about Kangchu, which is the name of the Chinese headman, who was basically parallel to a Malay headman. When I say he was parallel, it's because he was giving the same letter of credence as if he was a Malay headman. It was also in Jawi. I only find one document where we had a translation in Teochew at the back, but it's a very, very contemporary one. So it was in Malay, and he had the same right and duty of the Penghulu, exactly the same one. Basically, he had to follow the rules of the state, the present and the future. He was giving the responsibility of guarding, the name is guarding the river, because those settlements were around the river. So basically, if you erase the name Kangchu, is exactly the same logic as the Malay states, which logic was what we call the mandala state. I'm sure a lot of you have already heard about it, where you have a center, where basically the country is understood from the center. So that was a way to integrate the Chinese community in the Malay polity through this Surat Taulia. Next, please. There was not just the Surat Taulia, that was the first one, basically giving the right to be there and to be a community, and that community was part of the Malay Kingdom. We are also giving a lot of other certificates that are designated in the study under the name Surat Sungai, so the document of the river. They have been studied by Karl Trocky, but in his study, which is wonderful, he looked at the Surat Sungai only for the economic information. So he was studying the Kongsi, the Chinese organization, and he didn't look at the Surat Sungai as a legal and cultural document. There are different types of Surat Sungai, but I will talk about the two main. The first one, after the Surat Taulia, there was a certificate authorizing the person to clear the land, to start a plantation. And when that plantation was finished, someone maybe wanted to sell the right to work on it. So you never sold the plantation, but the right to work on it, or to transfer it in terms of heritage. And then you have two other documents, Surat Jual Beli and Surat Serahan. What is striking in those documents is that land is always, so it's the word is Tanah, is always refer in relation to the river. So you never have even a toponym. It's always the land of that river. So it's the land which is near. So of course you don't have borders. So if you don't have a lot of land, you have a lot of trouble because you will have different people given different certificates to open land of that river. And it's in the river watershed. So there is one moment where, the land will just meet. So those documents have never superficie, never borders, but they're extremely worked and extremely thought about. They are in Malay with the Arabic script. I will show you an example. They use Malay terminology, but we can see some sign that there is a British legal phraseology that is used, some words that does not sound right in Malay. And we know that the Tumenggung, who were also living in Singapore, they also kept some land in Singapore. They were very often, they had a lawyer and they had a firm that were advising them for when they were dealing with the British. So they were in Singapore dealing with the British, with British law. At the same time in Johor, we were developing a system where the British has nothing to do, but it was so close to Singapore that of course they got some advice. And my guess is that they also wanted that their new system look legal enough and to take use a term that has been mentioned yesterday, credible for the British as a credible legal document, so that they borrowed some vocabulary. Next, please. So here I show you it's a copy of a record. So that's also the first time that in the Malay world we have archival practices. So they issue the surat, then after they also archive it. This is the oldest example that we have from 1844. And if you see, 26 is written 2 times in letter and in numbers. And this is something which we never have that in the Malay world. But if we look at the printed form, very often you have to write in letters and in numbers. The fact that the Sultan say we and the name the Tumenggung and the name of Tumenggung is also something that is not Malay. So there are other cases where we can see that you have a lot very subtle things that have been taken from this British legal phraseology. Next, please. So that was for the Surat Sungai. There are many more. I just give you some example. And now I would like to give you another example of agreement, which are named perjanjian or geran, like it's a corruption of grant. Perjanjian is also the term that is used for treaties. And in fact, those look like treaties, at least they have the same form with different articles. The way they are written is also very much like treaties. They are issued at the same time as the Surat Sungai, on land that are 1 or 2 kilometers away, but for other communities. So at the same moment, the same person, the same office, institution, the Tumenggung, use 3 different legal documents. One when he's dealing with the European, he's using the European one in English. One with, this is the Arabs community, or I would say Middle Eastern, I don't know if they're all Arabs, and one with the Chinese. So here I was tempted to thought that it was completely Malay, but in fact not. And again, we have the same thing. If we look at British model used in other straight settlements, more or less at the same moment, then we see that they are also borrowing of some sentences. So here we have his executor, administrator, and signees, which always come back in those times of contract, and it's copied in Malay. And we also have this these Malay terms that are created at that moment and that now are completely part of the vocabulary, but did not exist before. Sampadan is borders. There was no word to say borders before in Malay. And piece of land, it's the literal translation, sakuping tanah. It sounds very strange in Malay. You don't say a piece, you say a piece of textile, but you don't say a piece of land. So, but now you say it. So that's, at that moment, they also copy what was in English and they render it Malay. Next, please. These are just other examples of other certificates that we are producing in Penang, and where we can find this very strange, so no all men by this presence. You find that after in the Malay, ketahui lalu segala orang yang ada haji dan lainnya, which I thought was an oral declaration, was something made orally, but in fact not at all, and is something again which is copied. And this comes in fact from a Latin sentence that is used in Europe since the Middle Age. So here we have, this borrowing from one practice to another. And then the fact to sign and having the stamps of the ruler is something that was quite common, but it was not so common to have the witness. You always have witness wherever you have something. We had always in the pre-colonial period those witnesses, but never they sign, never they have there. And the fact that in Malay now you have tanda tangan sakti, which is the same, which is sign of the witness, is also, let's say, borrowing of those English British documents. So why is it important? For 2 things. First, for Malay literature or Malay letters, we never look at those documents. We always look at hikayat, chronicle, traditions, letters between rulers, big diplomacy, but we never look at those documents. And those documents show really those fine negotiations that are completely at the back, but that have huge impact after. Second fact, what I found it quite interesting. Next, please. Is because we see that Malay culture was not static. It developed, and it's not a copy-paste, it's really a negotiation. Because honestly, to look at those terms that have been borrowed and why they have been borrowed, it's not something that has been meant randomly. They really choose very small items that will render their very Malay certificate the appearance of the legal document for the British. And again, it's important because those certificates are not involving Europeans. They're involving Arabs, they're involving Chinese, and they are not officially under British rule. They are just next door in Johor. I think that it was important for the Tumenggung because if we look at the map, you had straight settlements, and we had around Johor other sultanates, but those sultanates have residents. And Johor is the only one that does not have a resident, that is still with the independent Malay ruler. So it's a little bit like when the Thai wanted to show to the European that they were civilized enough and they did not need to have a European power on them. I interpret this play, this creation as the same sign for the European. But I have questions, of course. I'm asking myself, if it's a cultural negotiations between community, how comes that there is no sign of Arab or Chinese practice? So as Guillaume before was asking for his petition, how the Chinese doing petition, I'm also asking myself, how did the Chinese have land deeds? And I tried to look in the Dutch Indies, could not find it, but the one that I found for the debt, the Surat Gadai, we have these very standard things where you borrowed money and you pound the land, are very different in the Dutch East Indies and also in Johor. So one of my questions, and I would be very grateful if you could help me to think about it, is why don't we have anything that points to Arab or Chinese participation in those contracts? And one is only Malay and European. That's, I think, the only thing I wanted to talk about today. I hope I did not take too much time.
Thank you very much, Elsa, for your wonderful presentation.
And thank you for the PowerPoint.
I see it.
Okay. Okay, so thank you very much for the invitation. It's a pleasure to be here. I always want to be to Pompeu Fabra. I've never managed it, so thank you very much that you have given me the opportunity. Thanks also to Paula for inviting me here. We are now getting back to the Philippines. And I'm presenting something like a sidekick here. It was never a research project for me, but it was of interest to me always since I first read parts of Barrantes Guerras Piraticas, that I saw this event basically, and I was always intrigued to at some point dig deeper into that diplomatic happening in the 1770s between the British, the Sulu Sea, and the Spaniards. So let me start and let's see if this works for you. At the beginning stands the Sulu attack on British Balambangan in 1775. You see two dates. It's not very clear when it was actually, depending on the East India Company dates or on the Spanish sources to be consulting. The Spanish sources consistently say it's on the 5th of March. The East India Company say it's on the 26th of February that this attack happened in the year 1775. So it doesn't really matter for our purpose here. The leader of this attack on the British settlement on this very small island, maybe you see it here on the map, just between Borneo and Palawan, was the Tausug Datu Teteng. And he was probably not acting by himself. He had the support of other Datus, and we don't really know if the Sulu Sultan was involved in the attack as well. But I'll get to that back in a moment. The results of this attack was basically that there were many deaths, only 5 survived, again according to Spanish sources. Out of about more or less 150 people or Englishmen who were stationed at that factory. When we switched to English sources, only 13 were killed. So that's quite a big spread that we're having here. So we can't say for certain what really happened there. What we do know is that the English were ousted from that island, and they were not coming back to Southeast Asia for about a decade. So that's how I'd like to start the presentation. And then to understand what's happening in the years before that, I think we have to take a look what's going on here in this triangle of relations between Britain, the British, with their bases in Madras, the Spanish with their bases in Manila, and the Sulu Sultanate with their bases on the Jolo Archipelago. So, and of course, the Balambangan Island, as you can see here, one of the small islands between Palawan and Borneo, so just in the middle. So As we know, the 7th century saw less interactions or military interactions or threats between Spain and England or Britain after the Francis Drake. Actions in the 16th century, in the 17th century was less active, but in the 18th century the East India Company comes back, as we know, and the threat becomes very clear with the War of Jenkins' Ear and with the capture of the Manila galleon in 1743. Then with the Battle of Plassey, we have the issue that the East India Company starts a realignment totally in Asia and Southeast Asia, and also starts thinking differently about how to approach commerce with China. And in 1761, they sent the company servant Alexandre Dalrymple to explore alternative and better and interesting ways to get to China and to get the Chinese tea from there. So Alexandre Dalrymple made his first visit to Jolo in 1761, so right away he goes there with a clear plan in mind. He thinks that the region of the Sulu archipelago might be very well suited for this stepping stone from Madras to China. So arriving there in 1761, he makes a treaty of friendship with the Sultan of Sulu, Bantilan, and then some months later he comes to Manila, and there he's surprised to find another Sultan of Sulu, Azimuddin, and I guess you all know the story about the Sultan coming to Manila, having to flee, getting baptized there, and then being imprisoned there for over 10 years. So Dalrymple comes to Manila, to Spanish Manila, and finds another Sultan and lets him sign more or less the same contract that it already signed with Bantilan in Sulu. However, he's not allowed to go any further with his project because in Madras and then in London, they are kind of skeptical in regard of how the English should insert themselves in this very complicated area between the Dutch, the local powers, and the Spanish. So he has to stay down for some time. However, on the 12th of September of 1762, Dalrymple gets a cession of the island of Balambangan. So the cession, at the beginning, it says all of the islands between Borneo and Paraguas, or Palawan. And then it says some islands, then it says just Balambangan. So this very small island just in between that two bigger islands. And actually, really, on the 28th of January 1763, the East India Company is able to hoist the banner of the East India Company on that island. However, this is not important anymore as it is in the middle of the 7 Years' War and the British occupy Manila in that time, so it all moves to the background, not becoming so interesting at the moment. Even though this is a very much Royal Navy operation, and the East India Company is actually not so much interested in the whole enterprise because it doesn't make any sense on an economic basis to take Manila. It doesn't make sense for them. However, the East India Company is involved and is actually managing Manila during that time. So they also capture Azimuddin, who still is in Manila at the time, and also the Prince Israel is captured at that point. It is an interesting detail that at that point preparations were full going on in bringing the Sultan actually really back finally to Sulu, but at the moment he's now captured by the British in Manila, and they get his signature again to confirm the East India Company to have the island of Balambangan. So to confirm again this possession of the British of this island. When the British, after the peace treaty of Paris, are forced to retreat from Manila, they leave Manila and they take Azimuddin with them, and he resumes the title of Sultan in 1764 when he's back in Sulu. Dalrymple starts right away with his activities and starts a little settlement in Balambangan, in the island. However, he is not able to really maintain himself. He stays there for some weeks, some months, but then due to lack of British support there, he has to leave the island again, which makes him return to Madras, and from Madras he returns to London, where he stays then. And the Spanish, knowing of these attempts, of course, protests in London against these activities and against the settlements that were planned in this region. And for that reason, more or less, the East India Company has to shelve this project. So they're not allowed to follow this idea for the moment any further. The king is not interested in this project anymore. However, some years later, Dalrymple, still in London, proposes again a very similar project, or actually the same project, with more details. The company petitions the king to follow through, and in 1768, the company really issues orders for ships to leave and to take possession of Balambangan. However, the whole enterprise is done without the permission of the king, so it doesn't really work out in the end. And it seems to be the death moment of death for the whole project. However, in 1771, definite orders are issued. By that time, Dalrymple is not working for the East India Company anymore. However, the project really starts only in 1771. In 1773, the Britannia, it's 2 years later almost, the Britannia arrives in Sulu under the commander of the expedition, John Herbert, and in December of 1773, he arrives finally in Balambangan. So that's the British side of the story there. Let's take a look at what's going on the Spanish side here. We have Governor General Arandia and his perspective on how the Zulu Sultanate works, and he, in my view, has a very pretty good picture, actually, of how this Zulu state is actually running. He perceives it as something like an ambulant republic, in the sense of there is a sultan, but the sultan is not really the one that's the only powerful person there, and he's rather a primus inter pares, as we have heard several times, I think. So that's his perception, a correct estimate, assessment of the Zulu state. In 1756, still, there comes the Tausug embassy from Bantilan in Manila, and they sign a treaty of peace and trade. So, in spite of the Spanish not really believing in the power of the Sultan, they still sign this treaty. What happens some years later is that orders from Madrid arrive, ordering them to attack the Zulu. So what we're having here is that the Spaniards now show their unreliability and show that they can't really trust these treaties and trust these agreements, and they now start fighting the Zulu. So the Tausug, in this kind of time of confusion, are happy to welcome the East India Company in the region, and as we've seen, they give concession to the East India Company, and even in the 70s, permission to settle in Balambangan. And this is the moment when the Spaniards in Manila start to think differently about it and start to think, okay, so maybe we should try to get the Zulu on our side at the end. And that's where we start with this specific case I want to aim at. In the Spanish negotiation, who is in charge of these negotiations? From the Spanish side is Governor General Simón de Anda y Salazar, and he puts in charge the governor of the Presidio of Zamboanga, who is Raimundo Español, a very seasoned veteran of the Moro Wars, if we call them that way, of the confrontation in the south of the Philippines for many years in Zamboanga. And there's another special envoy in 1773-74, which is Juan Cencelli, or Giovanni Cencelli, an Italian officer in the Spanish Navy. And from the Zulu side is, of course, the Sultan Israel, who has just recently become Sultan in 1773 because his father, Fernando I, or Azimuddin, or after his retirement, I think he adopts the name Ameril Mahumen. So he is also one of the negotiators still active in the process of diplomacy here. And other envoys are Datu Bantara or Datu Moloch. So the first rapprochement takes place under the command of Raimundo Español, this governor just mentioned, and he puts in charge Sargento Mayor Manuel Alvarez, who is second actually in charge, in command of Zamboanga. He also has about at least 20 years of experience as a soldier in Zamboanga, and what is in the sources, apparently he is a relative, a pariente of the Sultan, so not somehow related to the Sultan, let's put it that way. He has been the host several times when the Sultan actually was in Zamboanga, and is a very good friend of the Sultana as well. And when several datus were traveling for a diplomatic mission to Manila, he was also with them, showing them around in Manila. So it's very much integrated in the Zulu elite network here. The time of the mission is not very clear for me. I think it is somewhere happening between November and December of 1773. And the mission goal is pretty clear, to ensure the support of the Sultan against British schemes in the area. In the end, Alvarez stays for 53 days in Jolo, and he is treated like a prince, according to Spanish sources. His daily meetings with the elites, with the Sultan, with the Sultana. And what is very interesting for me in a cultural, historical level, he gives dance classes to the Sultana, the princess, and the datus. So it's like a big ball every day happening and dancing with the elites of the Zulu state. He, of course, gets a glimpse and a very good picture of the different fractions at the court of Zulu. There's the pro-Spanish fraction with Azimuddin, Sultan Israel, Datu Molok, and Datu Teteng. And there's a pro-British fraction with Datu Salikaya, the commander of the fleets, Azimuddin II, which is a cousin of Israel, and Sadat Uddin, which is even a brother of Israel, so a brother of the reigning Sultan. So these are very simplified speaking, the fractions in Zulu at that time. The Spanish basic position for this approach in diplomacy is that there was a letter from Philip V, written in 1743, and they basically repeat what was promised there, what was agreed there, so freedom of religion and support against Asian enemies. I think that's what we have already mentioned today, this promise of support for the natives. The Zulu, I mentioned the discontent they had still in regard to the imprisonment of their old sultan, and they complained that they're not allowed any representation in Manila. And what they demand instead is a representation in Zamboanga, a stable commercial relationship with the Spaniards, and Spanish troops, Spanish ships, and even Spanish instructors to help the actual sultan to become more powerful and more independent from internal unrest. The Zulu commitment they offer is a permanent Catholic preaching, and the other thing is that they know the uneasiness the Spaniards have with the British presence in the area. The problem is the Zulu are not able to oust them, to expulse them, but they kind of promise that if at some point the British would have to leave, it would not allow them to come back. So that's some promise they make. What else can they commit themselves for? To join forces against the Ilanon and Maguindanao, who at that point are very actively raiding the Philippines for slaves. And they would agree to free commerce for Spain, and in case the Spanish would send support for mining enterprises, they would be willing to give 20% of the production, whatever they have, to Spain. So that's basically the diplomatic package that we're talking about in this mission of Manuel Alvarez. And at the same time, and I think we are in a moment when John Herbert, with his ships ready to settle in Balamangan, is still in Jolo. And the mission of Manuel Alvarez is there at the same time. So there are the British there and the Spanish at the same time. So all of these dance classes, cultural interchange, diplomatic activities take place at a time when there's a lot of foreign activity in the port of Zulu. So what the East India Company tries to bribe Alvarez to get him on their side, which of course, well, not of course, but did not work at that moment. And the East India Company as well tries to persuade the Sultan to give them some other island, something else, because they're not very happy with this apparently very, not very healthy island, Balamangan. They want to have something closer to Solo, closer to the center of power of the Zulu. Seeing that the Sultan is rather on the Spanish side, and seeing that the Sultan is not so powerful as they believed, they tried to get the support of this other fraction, openly help this other opposition in Zulu against the Sultan, apparently. So at this moment, it seems like, at least from the Sultan's perspective, that the Spanish were very successful with their attempts to get the ruling class to their side. And when Alvarez returns to Zamboanga, a lot of Zulu merchants come with him, and a lot of commerce and trade takes place in Zamboanga with the Zulu. And this shows, of course, the commercial aspect of this whole diplomatic endeavor. What then takes place? Next step, of course, is on the 12th of December of 73, the East India Company arrives in Balamagan and starts this settlement. And when you read the East India Company sources, pretty fast is able to build a fortress, build a port, build every infrastructure necessary to start a commerce from the East India Company on this island. So this next mission is now in charge under the command of Lieutenant Colonel Juan Senceli. And the time of the mission is January 74, so just basically some weeks after the British arrive in Balamagan. And he stays in Jolo for 25 days. His official mission goal is to hunt Iranao's raiders. So that's a very simple mission, actually. But there is a secret mission to get the East India Company to leave the area. So what he has to do is to investigate the region around Balamagan, what's going on there, to express surprise and underline Spanish sovereignty when it encounters the British there, and by no means is he allowed to use any force. So it's not a military mission, it is pure, reconnoiter mission or mission to make first contact with the British there. And when he comes back to Zamboanga, he should pass by Jolo and deliver information on the British defenses on Balamagan to the Sultan. So there's another military information, or let's say spy case here. And to confirm the alliance existing between the Spanish and the Zulu. And then he should return to Zamboanga for debriefing. So that was his mission, actually, his secret mission. So on the 30th of December of 73, he actually leaves Zamboanga about 2.5 weeks after the English had arrived in Balamagan. He has one galley and 2 galiotas, and quite a lot of soldiers with him, actually. Raimundo Español, the governor of Zamboanga, he was prepared to send 7 days after Senceli left, to send information to the Sultan of Sulu to inform him of the real objective of the mission, and so that he is prepared when Senceli comes back. However, yes, right, and the idea of the whole thing is that the English in Sulu should not be aware of this mission. So Senceli should not pass by Sulu before that moment. What now really happens is Juan Senceli, 4 days after leaving Zamboanga, arrives directly at Sulu. In spite of having officially provisions for 2 months, he comes to Sulu saying there was not enough water and not enough provisions for the fleet. The Zulu reception is that they are friendly at first, but then they are very surprised by the very unorthodox behavior, or una conducta muy irregular. And they prepare their defenses because they seem to be afraid of a Spanish attack on Sulu. So also the Chinese in Sulu prepare for the attack, and I think at the moment there are like 4,000 Chinese in Sulu. Also the Visayan ethnic group there prepares for the attack. And also the British helps the Zulu to prepare for this attack from the Spaniards, which they actually were expecting at that moment. As promised, Español sends 6 days after this envoy. It's Graciano de Rojas, but even he cannot save the situation because the Zulu are so anxious that they don't believe anybody at the moment. There are even some skirmishes between smaller boats from the Spaniards and from the Zulu, and an increase in mutual fear and even anger that pops up among the elites. Senceli then sends 3 officers to explain the situation and calm the minds. However, what these officers do instead of going directly to the Sultan to negotiate is that they go to the Parian to do their commerce and business there, which is perceived as very disrespectful for the Sultan. And finally, he says, Israel says he would be very positive to provide provisions, basic provisions, but he wants them to leave right away. So that's basically his demand. And it's interesting to see that Senceli, being not a Spaniard, but originally an Italian, this also is a feature that's a problem for the Sultan. He seems to perceive that And of course, I think he says, when you take Barantes, for example, español es español, pero sencilli es algo diferente. So he is a Spaniard, but he is not a Spaniard. So not quite, exactly. The Sultan wants to communicate with his old friend Espanol, and unrest and anxiety strengthen the pro-Spanish fraction in Jolo, weaken the situation for the Sultan, and he complains heavily to Espanol and even to Alvarez, the Sargento Mayor, in Zamboanga. So the mission is a complete failure. This mission, what was originally planned, is a complete failure. What is the reason for that complete failure? Well, it seems that Sancelli was very envious of Raimundo Español about it was his plan, his position, and he wanted on purpose to sabotage this plan. One of the machinators was apparently his lieutenant José Áviles, who had the idea to pour away the water that was given to him in Zamboanga. Whose idea was to make the officers make wrong declaration of the officers about bad provisions that Español had given to them in Zamboanga, and it was his idea to blame everything on Español. So that seems to be one of the explanations why, in reality, Sancelli finally came to Zamboanga in spite of going to Balambangan. And there's another information, I'm not too sure what to make out of that. Sancelli demands from Manuel Rubio Unsay, a Chinese in the Jolo Barian, to send him and his officers 12 virgins. Doncellas de las mejores del reino. I really don't know what I should make out of that information. If it was true, of course, it was a diplomatic faux pas. Yeah, I'm not sure yet how to see that information here. And Sancelli as well instigates the Sultan to turn against his ally Español. So in spite of helping to unite the Spanish front against the British front in Sulu, what he does is to partition the Spanish side and make it something like a personal agenda for himself to get the support from the Sultan. He returns to Zamboanga on 24th of January and is not willing to give any journal to Español as the leading officer of this enterprise. So what is the follow-up here? Español, who learns what was going on from the letters of the Sultan, from the letters of the father of the Sultan, from the report of Sancelli and his officers. So he stops diplomatic activities until further orders from Manila. However, he sends 2 officers to Jolo to investigate the situation at the beginning of February, Ignacio Saavedra and Alonso de Castilla. Sancelli, from his side, tries to get Saavedra, so one of these 2 officers, on his side. And what happens is a very funny situation. This Ignacio Saavedra, in Zamboanga, he hides from Sancelli. So he just tries to get away from him, that this Sancelli is not able to give him dispatches for the Sultan. As he cannot get his hands on Saavedra, he sends his own officers, José Áviles, as an envoy to Sulu. These 2 officers finally reach Sulu, and they try to reconnect with the positive mission that had taken place before from Manuel Alvarez, and they grant even a permanent permission to Manila and say they do this en prueba de la verdad, de verdadera paz y amistad que unía a ambas naciones. So they really try to forget what had just happened with Sancelli and try to reconnect with the old embassy that's taken place before. And the Sultan, very diplomatically, replies to both dispatches from Áviles and from the Saavedra and Castilla embassy, and he informs them that the pro-Spanish fraction, in spite of the Sancelli expedition, is still very strong in Jolo. So what we have here is a very internal dispute between 2 military men on the Spanish side. Sancelli, as colonel of the Royal Regiment, has 140 troops at his service and accuses Español of a very tyrannic conduct as governor of Zamboanga, and he accuses Español of trading, including with the enemies, as governor of Zamboanga, which of course is forbidden. However, Español is having, as all of the governors in the Philippines de indulto, which means he's not allowed to trade, but nobody really judges him for trading, which is kind of a complicated thing, but the trading thing is not so heavy on his mind. When he's very strict against some Zamboanga soldiers, he can't use them for his everyday service because they take the side of Sanselli. And what happens then is that he, as governor of Zamboanga, has a shrinking number of troops actually in Zamboanga for the day-to-day business of defending the southern frontier of the Philippines. And when he asks Sanselli to support him in his endeavors, he gets a clear no. So this is when the defense of the archipelago is very much as well affected by this rivalry between these two men. So what we have here is a very embarrassing dispute among officers, and in the sources there are about 50 pages of letters from Sanselli to Espanyol, from Espanyol to Sanselli. So like writing emails there and back and there and back and there. Both people are in Zamboanga, so they just could talk, but they don't. They write 50 pages of letters, one to the other and the other to the one. So what is the aftermath? A little later, Captain Ignacio Saavedra again is sent to Jolo, and he has an audience with Azimuddin and Israel in Jolo, and they confirm their firm opposition against the British to him. And Azimuddin, whom he talks to in detail, complains about very arrogant British behavior because in Sulu, the pro-Spanish fractions, of course, not very happy with this English presence in Balambangan, and so they had imposed a tax on commerce with Balambangan. And the British are not very happy to pay that, and apparently it was an incident with a lot of insults to the Sultan, and that was the moment when Saavedra arrives in Sulu. So he laments heavily having ceded Balambangan to the British, and he even says, even though he can't actively drive them out, he says, pero tal vez habrá otro que logre dar en la cabeza a los ingleses. So a very interesting comment from a former sultan in Sulu. So now we're coming back to what happens more or less exactly 1 year later, the attack on Balambangan in winter of 1775. It was actually, and the sources seem to be clear about that topic, a revenge activity of an insulted Datu Tenteng, who argues that he had been insulted himself by the British in Balambangan, and his sultan had been insulted as well by the British, so he had to act. As I said, the support of the sultan is unknown. We know the sultan actually warned the British in Balambangan, and it did not act accordingly, but we don't know how this communication had taken place. So the Sultan has a very ambiguous position in this attack. However, the spoil of this attack is a lot of weapons, ammunition, a lot of merchandise, and according to East India sources, almost 1 million pesos. So a lot of money, a big spoil. As I said, the East India Company withdraws from the regions for about a decade, so does not come back for the next 10 years, and it is the rise of the Zulu Sultanate, as very well described by James Warren, not only because of this huge spoil and which bolsters the Zulu military capacities at the moment, but also because the British vanish, who had been a very strong supporter of the Maguindanao at the time, so this gives the Zulu a big advantage over the competitors in the region. And the two last slides, I want to hint to two important aspects in diplomacy. First, commerce. The local commanders in the Philippines always had the private interest, of course. They had this indulto, which means they were able to trade, and they did trade, and they did trade with friends and enemies alike. And just to mention a very interesting novel, actually, written in the middle of the 18th century, Vicente Alemany, following up on Quevedo's El Buscón, La tercera parte de la vida del gran tacaño, which describes very nicely and very well informed the activities of the soldiers and governors in the Philippines in the middle of the 18th century and their commercial activities and importance for that. Commerce can, of course, be seen as a vehicle of communication, creating trust, even though we can't touch trust. So trust is created, or if the interest, the commercial interests are contradictory, of course, it can give, a private interest can be an impediment of an effective governing, which of course also can take place. And in the case of Ramiro Español, the governor of Zamboanga and the Sultan, they were trading a lot, and they were on very good terms. So this would have been a positive reinforcer for diplomatic activities between Spain and Sulu. And then we're looking at the importance of conviction in diplomacy. Juan Senceli, he was at first not so acquainted with the situation in Zamboanga. He was just recently arriving there. He had less commercial interest in the area, not knowing the structures as well as Español. And he was not convinced by the plan of Español, because he said alliances with Moors are meaningless. They wouldn't be fruitful. The Iranon would keep on marauding the Philippines. The Zulus would keep on supporting the raids and purchasing slaves from the Iranon. And the only way forward would be a military offensive, an all-out attack on the Moros in the area. So after the attack on Balamangan, he even writes a letter to the Governor General asking him to be given the honorable task to destroy the Ilanon and to annihilate the Zulu in the area. So that's the position that he comes from, the perception that he has a little bit in this direction. So in the end, just pointing to the conflicting interests that we have with diplomacy from the military, as you've seen with Senceli, from the commercial, as it might have happened with Español, and as I've pointed out in other papers as well on the religious. So what it all comes down to basically is that in every actor, in every step of the diplomatic endeavors, we have different aspects that we have to take into consideration. Thank you.
Thank you. It was a pleasure. Okay, so I think we can start with the questions that you guys might have. I mean, for the three. ¿Sí?
Thank you very much for the three presentations. I was thinking, listening to Eberhard and his contribution, that some of the themes that we talked yesterday are, it's impressive, it's incredible how we can find it again in the 18th century. No? You mentioned some of them, the protocol, for example, or the cultural codes, no? When the ambassadors or the envoyers arrived to the, no? And I was, when you mentioned, I think, well, there are two or three aspects that I want if you can explain a little bit more. How, or which kind of information we have of these people that were chosen for the envoyers? For example, you mentioned that the governor, no? You mentioned the governor, and then the governor of the Presidio, and then a special envoy. Which kind of information are kept in the documents or in the manuscripts that you have checked? And which were the abilities of these people? It's possible to find some descriptions on the abilities, linguistical or cultural, or I don't know. And it surprised also me the aspect, the negative aspect, no, related to the Spaniards. And if you can explain a little bit more, because I think that probably in the documents you have find more information on it. And the other thing that I would know is if in the documents are kept the information related to the face-to-face encounters. I don't know if I am explaining. We know, no, that there were meetings or something like this, but which kind of information on these episodes of face-to-face encounters are included in the manuscripts. And thank you very much again for the 3 presentations.
Yeah, we have more. Can we collect maybe 2 or 3 questions and then?
I have 2 questions. The first one is for Eberhard, and it's related to this last point between the relation between commerce and diplomacy and the private interest of these military men. I've been working on similar aspect regarding in the Spanish and Portuguese presence in Maluku in late 16th century, and I was wondering if you have identified any kind of correlation between the involvement of these characters in trade and their attitudes towards violence or restraint. Because, for instance, in the case of the late governors of this Portuguese presence in Maluku, you can identify those who managed to have a more efficient access to country trade, private trade, prefer to de-escalate the situations, while on the other hand, those who stayed there only for 3 years and could not obtain a real access to this very lucrative trade were more eager to engage in these raids and this low-scale warfare that at the end resulted into violent escalations. And I wanted to ask you, you have identified this relation between private trade and violence de-escalation or violence restraint. My second question is for Guillaume. I really liked your presentation. I remember we had the chance to discuss some aspects a year ago or some months ago here in Barcelona in a more informal setting, and for me it was great to hear you hear all the explanation. Two questions again. The first one has to do with to what extent these petitions mirror some aspects of the different political cultures of these diasporas. You already mentioned to this Caja, that is an institution, an economic institution, more or less Chinese diaspora West Familiano. But when I saw the first petition, that from 1582, they are basically complaining and saying, okay, we are moving away from this. And this connects with one of the formal rights to protest from lower class people in Japan. When they are not at good terms with a daimyo, they are allowed to make this petition and thus to move into another daimyo. I'm not the expert of Japanese history here, but I was wondering that. And then the second question, you pointed out the need to move away this distinction between, okay, these petitions are composed by Chinese or by these religious actors, and I totally agree with you in the need to look at these documents as a collective creation. And I was wondering if this collective endeavor continues once after the composition. I mean, what happens with these texts after it is written and if it is delivered? Which impact they have? Not only in the imperial administration, that is the aspect more evident, but outside it. But just to sum up, I really, really, really like about your presentation. I really enjoyed it.
Por favor.
Yo también, me ha gustado mucho la presentación, no, y ahora Cuando mencionabas los memoriales, las quejas, ¿no? Aquel listado que me ha parecido muy interesante. Yo recordaba, y ahora lo buscaba, yo recordaba un documento que creo que es de finales del... No, quizá lo tenías y no lo he visto, porque... que es un memorial que también es colectivo, que está, creo, conservado en AGI, en Sevilla, y que al final tiene la firma de todo, ya no son, tú has apuntado, no es bueno, tú has dicho, son peticiones colectivas, a veces individuales, y a veces los tenemos por gremios. Es decir, que hay un memorial en que aparece, yo ahora miraba, ¿no? Las tiendas de gorros, las tiendas de pantalones. Entonces también es interesante ver, y tú en tu reflexión le decías, ¿no? Hay una parte que es el comercio, pero también cruzar todos esos datos, ¿no? Porque esto me parece que es y te lo puedo mandar, un documento de 1686, que aquí solo tengo la parte de abajo, pero que está firmada por los gremios, para entendernos, de profesiones, y yo lo que tengo aquí traducido, al menos hay 15 o 16 de estos, y por lo tanto creo que es interesante esta visión, ¿no? que planteabas, Guillaume. Gracias.
Pues yo era más preguntas porque si je vais faire du multilingue aussi parce que c'était pour Elsa, comme je suis pas familier avec ce dont tu parles. Je voulais savoir un peu concrètement de combien d'hectares ou de terres on parle. C'est énorme ou je sais, vaguement quoi. El tamaño de todo esto. Y aussi de combien de personnes. Tu t'as parlé des Chinois qui arrivent, qui repartent. C'était juste pour avoir une idée. Et puis évidemment, je pense que si tu avais ce type de document, tu nous l'aurais montré, mais par curiosité, on est à la fin du 18e, tu as parlé des Britanniques, il y a des sortes de cadastres ou des plans, quelque chose qui... Est-ce que... Ou à part, puisque tu vas jusqu'au 19e, est-ce qu'on a des choses de ce style-là? Voilà, bon, c'était une curiosité. Et... Ah oui, era para Eberhard también muy concretamente, estaba en Google Earth Maps para ver qué parecía, ¿cómo se llama? Balambangan, y hoy en día es una isla casi desierta, no hay nada. Entonces era realmente para tener una, como tipo entrepôt, una plaza para, en términos geoestratégico, no
La verdad
sé
es que
por
no
qué.
entiendo I don't really understand why Dalrymple was so fond of this island. I think one of the things he mentions actually is that when you make a circle, concentric circle, and to have all of the most important ports around in the middle, then that would be the place.
Okay.
So at some geometrical reasons, maybe he said, okay, that would be good, not too close there, but everything included. So I think that might have been one reason, and he wasn't thinking too much about really staying there and living there, because I think it's a very unhealthy and a place where there's nothing really to have. And it's very small, as you say, it's very small. 2 harbors, small harbors. It says there is fresh water there, so apparently water is not the problem.
Yes, hay un pueblo.
Yeah, but I don't really understand why it's so interesting. And he says, of course, it's in a strategically interesting position, because just blocking the way between Borneo and Balambangan. So I think it's strategically also very interesting. But the British who actually have to live there then, they say, no way, we want to have another place closer to Solo. Doesn't make any sense. Okay, so the question, thank you very much for both questions. Of course, I also see this correlation between the person more informed, more interested in the commerce, being very inclined to have less escalation of violence there. Everything that would disturb his commerce would be horrible. But it is not necessarily always related to the time that the person is there, because some people have the governor of Zamboanga for only a short time, but sometimes they already arrive with some merchandise, because they know that they're going to do a lot of trade there, and they have like 2 or 3 years' time to earn a lot of money there at this position, and then they have to go back. So I think it was perceived, especially in the middle of the 18th century, of a position where you can make a lot of money. I don't know if everybody did it, but the existence of indulto also gives me a hint that there might be something. And then, of course, Sensei does make the impression he is not the one who really is so much interested in the commerce, but he's the one who's a military guy. And this leads me to your question, what do we know about these people? Honestly, I don't really have a lot of information about Espanyol. He was there for over 20 years. He's a very seasoned officer of Zamboanga. He was really a long time there, but I don't have a lot of information on him yet. I'm still looking, so I might find some treasures there. Yeah, yeah. On the other hand, this Sensei guy is a seasoned soldier of European battlefields. He was fighting alongside who would later become his protector and president of the Council of Castile. And he actually, most of the, many of the letters that we find in the archives are actually from him to his protector in Madrid, who by that time, I think he also had become the ambassador of Paris, something. But when he's writing, he still thinks he's still the president of the Council of Castile. That's a very powerful protector that he has, actually. And while he is in Zamboanga, he actually receives the promotion from lieutenant colonel to colonel. So he's a very seasoned, very well-respected and reputed military man. And I trust him insofar that he's not a lot of commercial interests in the region. So a little bit we do know about these persons, but not an awful lot. In regard of cultural codes, of course, this not so experienced colonel, lieutenant colonel, who comes there doesn't know the cultural codes, even though he has this staff at his side who's able to recommend things. But for example, there's usually a procedure of cannon shots when you arrive at the port, which he does not do when he arrives in Sulu. Like this, the officers in Zamboanga know very well, so I don't know, 2 cannon shots mean that, or being polite is that, and he doesn't follow these instructions, he just ignores them. And I think this brings me to think that there might be a certain amount of arrogance from his side, but it's very, very personal perception, it's nothing I can pinpoint at that moment. And I think the last question was in regard to face-to-face encounters. No, it's very difficult. It's very difficult. I think this hint to dance classes for me was already like, wow, what's going on there? And as an Austrian and the culture of waltz and so on, I was like, okay, I have to look into that. So I was very intrigued by that, but there's not much more information in that regard, even though it's almost there for 2 months and in very close contact with the elites there. So far, I've not yet a lot of information on that embassy and what was going on the ground there. On the other hand, I think Sensei Lee, he stayed on the boat for the whole 25 days, and he never met any sultan or his closer family, I think. Thank you.
I think Paola, please. We can't hear you. Again.
No, sorry.
Okay,
but
okay.
I mean, I think Elsa didn't answer or something. No, I make my question. Okay, I can make my question. So I have 2 questions. I mean, one probably it's not really a question. It's just I was thinking. But I'm really tired now, so I hope that I can speak very clearly. But I think that my propos could be for everyone, but probably more especially to Guillaume or Elsa, but probably also for Eberhard. Because before we spoke about, I was really interested about this ambiguity, the term ambiguity in discussion, ambiguity in the propos. But and Elsa, you mentioned, I mean, if I agree, because I'm tired, but if I really understand, you say that this ambiguity you can see this ambiguity also in the different form, in the different norm that. And I just want to ask you if this ambiguity could also be in the text in document that we use, the sources that we use, the Spanish or everyone, Chinese, Spanish, English, or what you want, and about the non-dit, or the unspoken, or the sous-entendu, or sometimes And this is why this was a really interesting subject for me in the beginning, for the beginning of the 18th century with China and Chinese merchant and European merchants, about the trop dit. I mean, they say too much. They mean you know, when you read some European sources, you find things that could be not the reality. I mean, when you know the reality in China, the reglementation in China, you think that this could not be, I mean, there is no one governor of Fujian province that have, I mean, they can say these kind of things. So my question, it's not a question, it's just, you know, thinking about, I thought about, what is this? I mean, I think that in this ambiguity, we also need to put all these things inside. You know, the non-dit, the trop dit, or something like that. The other one is a question especially for Guillaume, but anyway, with Guillaume we can speak, we have time, so if you don't have time, you can answer another day. I mean, I don't speak about petition because a Chinese petition, I can explain you, but I'm really interested about this Chinese petition in the Philippines, and I want to know if there is a lot of Chinese text, not translation. And another question for Elsa, because I'm not sure that I really understand very well, but I think that at a moment you spoke about the language and you say that you are not sure that it's really Arab. No?
No, it's not.
No. I just was because for me the Arab in the term, I mean, now we just beginning to, you know, to just try to understand who was this Arab in Asia. So probably I just imagine. Okay.
Sorry, no, you mean the person?
Yeah.
And the language. Yeah, we don't know. I mean, they can be Arab, or they can be Gujarati, or they can be.
Okay.
But
okay.
they are categorized as Arab.
They are categorized. Yeah. Okay. So yeah. Understand.
Peut-être que Elsa, tu peux, si tu veux.
Oui. Je réponds en. I will answer in English or French, or I don't know, maybe it's. So you ask about the hectare, and we have a lot of numbers measure, but no hectares. So it's always how many piculs. So it's its weight for the pepper, for the gambir. All the study that you will find on the country system is all about numbers, but we don't have hectares because it's not on the document, because it's always the land of that river. About the people is thousands of people. So, for example, the one that we moved in a few months from Singapore to Johor, when the British decided that they will measure the land, and then you have it's 4,000 Chinese that live. And it's exponential, it's 4,000, 10,000, it's always thousands of Chinese that are moving. But the plantation, what they call the plantation, is very small. It's 25, 50 people. And the few pictures we have from the early 20th century, it's not a plantation in the European, you know, that imaginary that we have. It's really very, very small. And it's as much as people can, let's say, cultivate. And well, that was not my conclusion for today, but very often it's speculation. It's land speculation after. But which is interesting is land speculation without knowing the size of the land, which for me was interesting because it's all about how the conception of space changed. And it did not change. You know, those borders, those things did not make people continue to see land as the product of the land, how much product you can gain from the land, but not so much there. The superficie is never important. Regarding the cadastre and maps, we have it, but haven't never seen it for Singapore, because when we have the grant from the Tumangul, he referred to numbers. So he will sell numbers. Say, I give 4 parcels, I sell 4 parcel number, this, that have been recorded by that person at that date. So we know that the record exists, but we just see it from the grant. They are not available anymore. Because for Singapore, they were really measuring, because it's so small as well. And maybe just if I can say something about the non-linear or sous-entendu. I think in law, there is always things, you don't say everything. And I'm looking a lot at those documents as legal documents. I remember when there was the problem, recently Sabah, when the Sulu Sultanate very recently won the case against Malaysia, like 2 years ago, and then they lose it again. It was millions of dollars. Because they have the historical contract that this is their land. And when I ask someone, he say, well, but law is just lawyers. It depends, who, it's not the truth. It's what you can make. If you can make your point at a certain moment using what is maybe not said or what is, how you say, sujet à discussion, what you can debate about. And I think when we talk about agreement and paper, and it's never everything. So you always have spaces where you could enter and you could, let's say, use it as your advantage. Yeah, that's it.
Maybe answer to a few words to answer the questions. Así la cuestión de José Miguel sobre si se puede comparar, esta cuestión de los excesos, ¿no? de las autoridades, y te referías a Japón. No sé, pero para China, en el artículo que mencioné, se habla mucho de las peticiones. The petition are about lands a lot, because at the beginning of the 17th century, he said that they were the phenomenon that you was pointed, like this idea that there is migrants, the lands, they need people to cultivate the lands, and so a lot of petitions are about that, to say we are here, we cultivate, and we need protection because there is like big latifundios that wants to get the lands, our lands. So I think there is comparisons possible. But I don't know for Japan, because they are not Japanese. So Pero es un clásico, ¿no? El tema de la tierra. Así, la cuestión de qué pasa después, pues es un poco la idea de Cerruti, ¿no? Es decir, que el hecho de, tenemos los documentos que tenemos, la petición es un documento, hay la respuesta administrativa, pero como dices, no nos interesa tanto al final, nos interesa más que cuando uno se juntan para pedir algo, pues pasa algo social y político. Y entonces, en los casos aquí no tengo respuesta porque son documentos puntuales, pero tal vez voy a encontrar otros documentos que eso es más, pues... Sí, los gremios, sí, pues hay varias, hay otra de 1625, creo, Ana, que está en el Archivo General de la Nación, no sé, estos documentos varios, y las peticiones vienen de estas cabeceras. Y esto no me atrevo a decirlo, pero sé que en el mundo chino hay estos grupos profesionales, y no recuerdo la palabra, pero es fácil encontrarla y creo que hay una correspondencia clara con esto y se juntan. Y también hay otro tema que no entré en esto, pero hay también la organización clánica y hay como fuentes españoles que describen este fenómeno clánico y corresponde a lo que pasa en China, ¿no?
Si me permites, Guillaume,
sí.
Y ayer veíamos algunos rollos, algunos scrolls, si fijas en Caifén, ya desde estos momentos en China se organizan lo que tú dices,
Sí.
es una reproducción de lo que tenían en China,
Sí.
ya se organizan con estos,
¿no?
con estos gremios,
Eso.
las pinturas,
Sí.
la Caifén de los hombres así,
Sí,
realmente
y con esto de la... Sí, como dicen, ahijados, etc. Pero eso es otro, es un tema que está dentro, es un poco encajado y poco a poco voy a tratar. Así pour Paola, les non-dits, les trop-dits, creo que pues hay muchos especialistas aquí. Creo que se ha utilizado para los sangleyes muchas fuentes que describen lo que son los sangleyes, ¿no? Hay documentos, el obispo Domingo de Salazar describe, es extraordinario, pero a mí pues lo voy a utilizar, pero como has entendido, interesar más, pardon Paola, je parle en espagnol, tu me comprends ou c'est dur? Ouais, ok.
I say that it's okay.
Yes, there is a lot of texts that are description, like with all the stereotypes and etc. about the sangleyes. Bishop, like he say, the sangleyes are like this or like that, or letter, etc. But I think that we need to use also, and that's the idea. En français, we say source de la pratique, source de fuentes del cotidiano, etc., que no son discursos sobre los sangleyes, sino que son los sangleyes actuando. Hay también un discurso, no soy, pero porque hay muchas, ¿no? Que son y que se repiten mucho, un poco al finales del 17 puedes leer el mismo que un siglo antes. Así que sí, se ha dicho mucho sobre los sangleyes, pero se ha repetido estos estereotipos. Y además, there are texts for Spain, no? For the king, so there is a purpose here that is very, I think we have to see other sources. Et Paola, siempre me haces, tu me fais toujours la même question, non? S'il y a des textes en chinois, mais il n'y en a pas en fait. Il y a celui de 1598 là.
Il y a celui que tu veux qu'on traduise alors.
Oui, il y a une nouvelle traduction là, de 1598 qui est parue, je te le disais. Et après il y a les signatures, quoi. Las firmas, sí, que hay varias, creo que se pueden utilizar, y luego hay ¿quién lo mencionó tú, Ana? ¿No? Krauser, el que es especialista de la lengua de los sangleyes. Con los diccionarios, Paola, por ejemplo, vi en el artículo de Richard, no sé qué, sobre las peticiones en los Ming, hay una palabra para decir petición, que es deng, creo. Y en el documento, in the document of the 1598, hay una palabra, there is a word in Chinese to say, to petition too. So I think that with little things put together, we could say things, but I don't, yeah, but we have not much. But with the big dictionary that José, ¿cómo se llama? Caño, de Cádiz, sí. Encontró, ¿sabes? Paola, le dictionnaire de Hokkien espagnol qui est à Manille. Je pense que comme on vient de le découvrir, il y a beaucoup de mots avec la traduction.
C'est celui qui est à Paris aussi?
Et qui est maintenant à la Maison de l'Asie, qui est à Paris. Il y en a d'autres, il y a un travail philologique à faire sur les mots, quoi, les mots pour dire les choses et le vocabulaire un peu sociopolitique, en fait, quoi. Je pense que... Donc, ce sera mes réponses.
Je pense que c'est un gros travail à faire, ça.
Oui, mais tu vas m'aider.
Can I have another question to Guillaume? I can.
Sure. I have one more question also, but go ahead.
No, the mine is very small because I don't know the Spanish regulation. So, because before you spoke about the shipbuilding, the timber cutting for shipbuilding, yep. And I want to know if in Manila the Chinese or others can build ship for everyone, or there is regulation on that.
Yes, they can do. They do it. yes, they participate, and I think they are very important. Comment se dit ces forgerons? They have different.
Carpenter?
No, no, Smith.
Ah, herreros.
They are smiths, carpenters, and in the counts you can see what they do and how much are they paid. So I think there is different things. And then I thought that they were only constructing ships, but they have a big importance in constructing buildings. Because we keep the counts, on sait cuentas, comment se dice? Accounts?
Sí, cuentas.
Donc les comptes of the reconstruction of the main buildings in Manila after the earthquake of 1642. And you have like some hundred of pages, like this Chinese carpenter. We bought him like 5 tons timbers, and for that, no, I think including for the people working on architecture, it's very interesting. No? So yes, there is work to do.
Yo quería comentar un par de cosas. One for you and the other one for... mi comentario es un comentario para Guillaume que tiene que ver con esto de las peticiones, porque claro, vamos a ver, en España hay una tradición de apelar al rey para, de alguna manera, exigir una reparación. Esto no es una cuestión, esto es una cosa conocida, ¿no? De hecho, en el caso peruano existía precisamente la costumbre de elevar peticiones al rey, enviar procuradores, que son los distintos procuradores de lo que estamos hablando el otro día, como representantes de algunos caciques para obtener una reparación, ¿no? Y esto es algo común y me parece que también debería tenerse en cuenta porque, sobre todo para el caso de una cosa que has comentado tú muy bien, el caso de las cajas de comunidades, que también existían en otras partes del imperio y en Perú, por supuesto, las cajas de comunidades eran un auténtico negocio para los curas doctrineros que se aprovechaban de ese dinero y, de hecho, buena parte de los problemas que hubo, esto en el caso de Perú, está el tema este de Huamampoma, él lo explica muy bien, los curas doctrineros se aprovechan de las cajas de comunidad de las comunidades, de las doctrinas, con lo cual esto que está pasando en Filipinas también tiene bastante que ver con lo mismo, ¿no? Y entonces también quería comentar otra cosa, cuando has dicho el tema del artículo este de Richard Lofrano, que has mencionado al padre Collado. Entonces me parece que es muy interesante por el caso de Diego Collado, que además es el primer caso donde interviene por primera vez propaganda fide en Filipinas, ¿no? Es decir, propaganda fide se funda en 1622 con la voluntad de que Roma pueda monopolizar la evangelización y centralizarla en Roma. En Filipinas nunca funcionó, al menos en el 17, en parte porque el proyecto de Diego Collado fracasó estrepitosamente precisamente porque los dominicos se opusieron a esto. Es decir, Diego Collado pretendía dividir la provincia del Rosario en dos. Y entonces, cuando esto se lo explicó al gobernador Corcuera le dijo que ni hablar. Y no solo él, sino también el provincial. Entonces es interesante porque lo que tú estás comentando de estos problemas que tuvo, además empezó a dividir la provincia, tuvo conflictos con toda la orden dominica. Es muy interesante el caso de Collado, precisamente porque además es el primer caso donde se intenta promover el dicasterio, ¿no? El dicasterio de Roma, que fracasa, ¿no? Entonces yo creo que también sería interesante explorar eso porque el caso de Collado también provocó muchas peticiones y protestas de sangleyes y de todas estas comunidades. And the other one for you, I was certainly I enjoyed very much all this, what you said, this diplomatic contentiousness from within the factions of, because I was thinking that, of course, when you were emphasizing these conflicts between Cancelli and Español, I was wondering if these two guys were, I don't know, I'm just guessing, if they were competing for some kind of higher position that might justify this confrontation, because it's kind of weird when you think that they were so opposite. And I was wondering, there's no religion around. There's no, I mean, you didn't talk much about religion. So, I mean, it seems that war and trade are not opposite, but then religion is not at the equation. Nobody was talking about this as a problem. Also, I was wondering if you could tell us something about what is about religion here in the story. I mean, it's not a motivation at all anymore. Or, I mean, when we compare with the 17th century, for instance, when we see missionaries around trying to justify we have to go to Mindanao or Sulu because we need to bring the faith to this. But now it's not, you didn't even mention that, which is great because it seems that the problem is different. But that's the thing. So, thank you.
Sí, gracias por los comentarios. Alexandre, creo que, sí, he visto, hay toda una literatura y una de las cajas de comunidad en América, y hay muchos puntos comunes y se ve que los dominicos están muy interesados en la caja de comunidad que genera mucho dinero porque tienen que pagar cada uno. Y al mismo tiempo tiene que ver con lo que comentaba José Miguel, que una caja de comunidad, incluso si está instituida por arriba, pues sirve para la comunidad. Y entonces es una institución, pero habría que ver a qué punto instituya una otra cosa que algo obligatorio, porque hay un hospital, como sabes, etc.
Yo me preguntaba quién tiene la llave.
Sí, son los monjes. Pero hay el gobernador de los sangleyes también. No te puedo contestar de manera firme. Y sí, habría que seguir el trabajo y no hay muchos documentos. Y sobre lo que dices no sabía, entonces muchas gracias sobre Diego Collado y su relación con la propaganda fide, pero parece como el diablo en los documentos, así que es interesante. Pero claro, ahí está, la mano de los monjes es importante en todo esto.
Thank you very much for this question. It is indeed very interesting how to see religion in that regard. Starting from the baptism of the Sultan, how is this baptism really religious or not? But then you have this governor who is actually a bishop, so it's another aspect of the whole thing. So in my perspective, end of the 18th century, we're talking about a time when religion does play less a role in the Philippines. That's my personal perception. Then there is a priest actually in Zamboanga who gets active to mediate between the two actors. And he's the only one actually really making the religious argument, saying that you're giving no good example for the Spanish nation and for the Catholic faith. So no good example for the peace in Christ. So that's the only one really talking about religion in that regard. Then the other one is about the how much did they fight for maybe a position? I have not found anything in that regard. I have not found anything that goes in this direction. Espanyol, I think he's shortly after he has to leave his position. I don't know how old he is by then, so I might have retired. And Senseli, he's actually staying in Manila, but he stays a colonel for a very long time. So he stays at least for like 20 years, or at least 15 years in Manila. He stays a colonel, not promoted anywhere, so no other place and no other position. So I don't think these people get any positions after that, but I don't know if they were competing for anything. My impression is really that it is about conviction, that Espanyol thinks that his way is the best way because we are here, I know the region, I know the people, I know the Sultan, that's my best buddy, whatever. So he knows what he does and he thinks this is a positive way to accomplish this for the governor. While Senseli, coming from this military background, or a more military background, we're fighting in Europe and having this military goal, and he thinks he knows how it works better and how he should do that. But of course, there's much more in between the lines, which I have not found yet, but I'll tell you as soon as I found it. And I think I still have to do more research in these 50 pages, which I have not gone into depth so far, so I really have to go more into depth in reading these lines in the communication between those two. Thank you.
No, basta.
Any more questions?
No, please.
Okay, if there are no questions, then, oh, okay, Pablo.
I have a question, but if we have time, I mean.
One more.
It's a question comment for Elsa and for Guillaume. Both of you, when you were presenting, I was really interested because you talk about rivers, both of you. You talk about nature, you talk about timber, cutlery, and I was asking myself to which extent or how are you considering to introducing a bit of environmental history in your perspectives, because it can be something really interesting. There is river historians, and especially, I was talking here with Jose Miguel about it, Felstein's Ballestart, who is working, for example, with a different space, completely different space, which is the Mississippi. And she is connected, actually, race with the access to the different resources, so political ecology and how that could be something that you could interact. I think that both of you pointed in some way, isn't it? But I don't know if it's a question or a comment, but I wanted to listen a bit of what you think. And in line a bit with this comparison with other spaces, I wanted actually to say to Eberhard that it's quite interesting that what you are describing is happening in other spaces of diplomacy between British, Spanish, and other kind of non-dominated space, non-dominated bárbaros, no? Moros, bárbaros, and even Moros in the sense of how, for example, Morocco take at the same time, is during the 1760s, 1770s, and 1780s, is during the end of Charles III, that there is a huge increasing of diplomacy in different parts of the world by the same kind of factors. So the kind of factors that you were pointed out is the same that I found, for example, in Louisiana. Sorry for return one more time to the Mississippi. And it's the same kind of factors that are sent, for example, to negotiate in Morocco. So if you want, we can talk more about it, but I think that there is something there to continue talking. Thank you.
Elsa, tu veux répondre?
Thank you. It's not an answer, but maybe a comment. I think you're totally right. It's I mean, especially for if you look at again treaties and agreements. There are borders that are drawn, but for people that continue to live their everyday life, it does not really change. I mean, the people in Sulu and up to nowadays in Sulu, they don't really care about the borders. I mean, people in Sulu and Tawi-Tawi, a lot of them have 3 passports and you just go from one place to another. So in the 19th century, that was the same. You have this beautiful book, I think it's Porous Borders, or is it the subtitle? Or for Singapore, the same. That's also why maybe you have this flexibility in law, because we cannot control. We cannot control everything. First, because of the sea. I mean, you see the Riau Johor, and if you go to Sulu, it's the same. Those are very powerful sultanates. At some point in the history, they are the most powerful sultanates, but they have no land. So it's another conception of space that we need to use to understand them. And when you follow people, usually, that's what James Warren did for Sulu, you follow people, you don't follow so much the space, then you reconceptualize the zone with the Sulu zone, then you understand better. For the Malay word, we talk about the riverine system. The name in Malay for the state is Negri, and a Negri is a riverine system, is following rivers. I think that's used not in terms of political ecology or environmental history, but as a concept that's used for a very long time for people studying polity in Sumatra and the Malay Peninsula, maybe in the Philippines, although I think it's really the same. We have the same logic, you know, of downstream, upstream. If you look at Maguindanao, they had this Buayan and Maguindanao. So you very often have to follow the nature to understand how the the state is organized. So thank you. Yeah. And just for the notes, it's a very, now it's environmental history is very, very trendy in a positive way in Southeast Asia. There's a lot of projects on it. So let's see what's coming up.
Pues sí, rápidamente sobre este tema, pues me interesa la referencia porque creo que claramente el tema de los ríos en la hidrografía de la región de Manila es muy importante. Todo, ¿cómo se dice? Los troncos de los árboles pues pasan por los ríos, ¿no? Como con balsas, se envían todos estos chinchoreros y champanes, etcétera, todo llega por el agua y no por tierra. Entonces es súper importante, por eso me interesa. Pues sí, me gustaría hacer también, si posible, esto del cambio de paisaje, deforestación. Hay un momento, pues, si cortas los árboles, no hay más y hay que buscar más lejos y eso aparece a lo largo del 17. Tienen que ir más lejos y hay revueltas de pompongueros, ¿se dice así? ¿Sí? Pompongos, perdón. Pompongos se revueltan porque no quieren ir a cortar estos árboles siempre más altos y lejos, etc. Sí, paisajes y lo de los ríos. Y hay esta adaptación agrícola, ¿no? El cultivo de arroz y el uso de animales para esto, ganadería, cambió los paisajes, pero hay temas también, me imagino, de técnica. Hay un debate si existía antes de los españoles ¿cómo se dice? La herramienta para labrar la tierra. El arado, en francés no lo recuerdo. Pues hay un tema, si es chino o si viene de España, etcétera, no se sabe muy bien. Y es necesario hierro para hacer esto, entonces hay el abastecimiento que viene de China, pues se podría hacer en un libro un capítulo sobre esto. Gracias.
No, just thanks for the comment. I think we can talk about this later, but it's very intriguing that there's an event happening globally at the same time, which I wasn't expecting. So yeah, let's talk about this later. Thank you.
So I think it's time for our dear friend Ubaldo. He's gonna give us some words. Yeah. David, you are our hero here because you are resisting.
Muy bien.
Es lo que mejor sale.
Sí, ¿verdad? Good evening, everybody, and especially those like Paola, who I guess now it's 1 o'clock in China, right? It's very late. And thank you for being here. I will just make a few conclusions about this workshop, this meeting we have with colleagues and mostly friends. So I'm delighted to be the discussant of this meeting, which covered a wide range of topics and raised a series of interrelated questions. Let me share with you some comments, and I will make just a resume, because I had only the abstracts, and I spent 2 days listening to you, and was so many interesting things. I brought it in my agenda, and now my agenda is quite messy, so I need to. So what it was, I think this workshop is particularly suitable for understanding intercultural diplomacy. And let's say the role of political agents, go-betweens, middlemen as cultural mediators. The analysis of suggested by the organizers of this meeting, the analysis of the modus vivendi between several regional collectives, communities, and powers has been the focus of this today's dialogue between several outstanding colleagues and scholars. During the workshop, we touched many topics, and I pointed out some keywords. We talked about negotiation. We discussed about the ambiguity, the ambiguity in diplomacy, especially just a few minutes ago, we said sous-entendu. No? And then we discussed a lot about trust, the meaning of trust. This was one of the principal topics. And, of course, treaties, how treaties were established. And then about the procurators. Actually, that of the procurators is one of the topics that links a lot of many presentations of these last 2 days. And then cultural codes, being intercultural diplomacy, of course, what kind of, if the mediators knew about the local culture was another important issue. So let me introduce briefly, like a summary, the presentations of our colleagues. First, I will move in chronological order. So first with Anna. Anna has introduced the mission of Pedro de Alfaro, which is a very, very important topic. Actually, I published something recently about Pedro de Alfaro. He sailed to China in 1579, and Anna drew attention to the role of the Chinese interpreters. How did these interpreters mediate if the mission of the Franciscans was successful or not? Well, it was not. Because of the interpreters, what was how it was, how to say, how their mediation determined the result of the mission. One question was, did the Spanish trust the mediators, the interpreters? Ana Busquets said, of course not. In the documents, we see, the interpreters are called intérpretes traidores, and even one interpreter is called el hijo de Satanás. And about these interpreters, as I said, me myself, I checked, I studied this mission, and the problem is that the two interpreters, one, the Juanico, this is my comment, Juanico, Juanillo is written in different ways. He was sent by Manila, so he sailed with the friars, and once he reached the friars were sailing to Fujian, to Qingzhou, but once they reached Guangzhou, the interpreter stayed mute. This is what se hizo mudo. Because he couldn't understand the local vernacular, because he was speaking some sort of local language in it's the Minahua, that's some dialect of the area of around Xiamen, let's say Zhengzhou, those areas, probably. But the other one was the other interpreter, Simon. He was assigned by the local Chinese, and he had worked in Macau with the Portuguese, so probably he had some interest in letting this mission fail. And another aspect I would comment is that, okay, they were traidores, but at the same time they were acting as, they saved the life of the friars probably because they were trying to explain that the friars reached China by chance because they were on merchant boats and they were just trying to, they lost their route and they ended up in China. Because the friars had this, especially the Franciscans, that's what makes them different in their approach from the Jesuits and the Dominicans. The Franciscans were trying to go there to preach the gospel, to show the universality of the message of God. So they wanted to say that they reached China on purpose, but that would be the end of their mission, and probably that would cause a lot of problems to Macau as well. So that's just one comment. And then you talked about, Anna Busquets talked about, she questioned about what language was used. Because then, of course, Chinese and different dialects of Chinese, but also if they were using Portuguese and Spanish, and how the missionaries taught to the Chinese Spanish language. Potentially, this Chinese, as you said, were studied Portuguese in Macau, or they had some knowledge of Portuguese, and compared to other languages, it's not that difficult to try to speak Castellano if you know Portuguese. Then, so the second paper of José Miguel Escribano Páez about beach diplomacy, this is an inspiring, how to say, depiction of the way the diplomacy was conducted in Ternate and Tidore in the Moluccas. In his presentation, he showed merchants, military men, religious actors, local authorities and representatives of different diasporas, how they shaped and shared a diplomatic repertoire. So how they shared a common way to act. For example, he gave us the example of the beach diplomacy because they were asked to remove their shoes out of respect, I guess this is. And it goes into details about this, the mission of Abreu, I guess it was Antonio de Abreu, to get back the fortress in Ternate to the Spanish. The mission failed because, as he said, the approach used by the Spanish did not fit with the cultural customs, local customs in Ternate. He pointed out to the importance of the oratory art. And the Spanish were too aggressive in the way they show themselves, and they were pretending to get this fortress back. And then he said something very, very, I want to focus on this, that the Sultan of Ternate wanted to respect the pact that he signed with the Ottomans, with the Japanese. And this is about how diplomacy was conducted in Southeast Asia. The word was most important, not the treaty. And this reminds us of the alliances and those treaties made during the period of Srivijaya. I'm thinking about the ancient history when they had this blood pact. They drank the water filled with blood, and they had these courses on. So this is something very local that the Spanish didn't understand in the way they approached these communities. Turning to a presentation of Pierre-Emmanuel Bachelet, this presentation highlighted the activities of several of crucial actors of the maritime space in East Asia through one main topic, as the strategies implemented to gain credibility and to be considered as a legitimate and trustworthy partner. In his presentation, he gave evidence to, first of all, he divided 3 periods. So a first period of exchange of correspondence with the relationship between Japan and Vietnam. Vietnam at that time was divided into 2 countries, generally known as Tongjin and the Annam and the Cochin China, what we call Cochin China. And then a period of the activity of the government with the Shuinsen project. That's when ships from Japan were sent to Vietnam, and they had a license, the so-called Red Seal licenses, and a third period after the closure of Japan in the 1640s. That's the so-called Sakoku. He pointed to several factors which were important for being successful. The first one was cultural proximity. So Vietnam was close to Japan because of the use of the so-called, it was inside the so-called Sinosphere, so they were using Chinese as a diplomatic language, at least Chinese characters, but not in the spoken formulas. And then the importance of finding the right place in the hierarchical structure, of the world order that was based in East Asia on the idea of sinocentrism. And one thing that I would comment, and I remember I read it in your book because it's a wonderful book about the relationship between very precise and very interesting. Is one aspect is the fact that in Cochin China, the Dungyuan were military rulers. And that thing made them closer to Japan, to a shogunate. They were militaries. On the other side, the Qin in the north, they were addressing themselves as kings. That meant that they were at a higher level because the shogun was not a king. The term is Wang. That's the character for king. This is another aspect. And then, of course, and this is also important, is supply the adequate gift. Presence had to be the right presence. This is something that applies to other countries as well. Then Birgit Tremmel, she gave us a very clear depiction of the several ways diplomacy was carried out by the Spanish in the Philippines. So she enlightened the differences between the general government diplomacy, and this is a big question, who was carrying the diplomacy from the higher level. Was the Governor General, were the officials? This idea that the diplomacy was carried by, let's say, the ruler of the state, but as far as China is concerned and Japan, for example, the Governor General of the Philippines was considered the local chieftain, so he was taking the tradition that belonged to the previous chieftains that sent embassies to China at the beginning of the Ming Dynasty. So he was addressed in several ways. We find, according to transcription of documents, the problem is that some documents are not original, they're just copies. In some copies appears a character for king, so the king of Luzon, and in other documents there's just the prince or the governor or the person taking charge. And And then friar diplomacy, we know about how the friars were mediators, and this is another comment I would do on this point, how the friars were traditionally the man in charge of bringing diplomatic letters. They were monks, and this accommodates the entire region, maritime region. If we think about the Buddhist monks sent to Southeast Asia in the past. Then of course, frontier diplomacy, and she made examples about Filipino de Pampanga, who was Sargento Mayor. He received a license to sail to Madrid as a procurator. And talking about procurators, I will comment on Alex COELLO and his paper about political agents and cultural mediators. The role of the Jesuits as procurators, who were at times economic agents, and when they went abroad, when they visited Spain, when they were sent back to Europe, they were acting as living letters. Because on this I have a comment. Actually, there's the mission of Alonso Sanchez. He traveled back to Spain, and at the same time, José de Acosta was traveling. He had the opposite to stop the position of Alonso Sanchez. And then, of course, Pedro Girino, and etc. I'm losing my sight. I think I'm getting old. I wrote too small. So yeah, this role of the procurator was touched several times in other presentations too. The following presentation by Mark Dyson, sorry, I don't know how to pronounce his name, but is about the royalty in theater in 18th century diplomacy. Mark Dyson presented the importance of ceremonies. The importance of ceremonies and how during ceremonies the titles were given. It could be political titles, honorific titles. For honorific titles, he presented the titles of Don, Doña, and then political titles, which were like the local dato, no? They got titles like alcalde or sargento mayor. There were military titles that gave them a military power. Sorry, this is not correct. What I want to say is they were the emblem. He said the emblem of authority. And he introduced. He talks about el bastón de mando. This is another cultural peculiarity of the Austronesian world. We see the same thing in Java, for example, with those objects, especially military weapons, who had some strength, inner strength, like the kris. No? I'm thinking about the daggers, the kris in Javanese culture, because the owner of these objects got this charisma. How to say this, charismatic power. There's, for the Moluccan world, there's the expression of mana, there's the mana. But this was studied by the Andaya, Barbara Andaya and Leonard. Then these, and on this topic, I have a comment on this, el bastón de mando. There's a very interesting comparison. In 1598, the governor of the Philippines, Francisco Tello, sent an embassy to Japan to for several reasons, because he wanted to regain commerce, trade, and then friars were killed. Just in February, 6 Franciscan friars were crucified. And those friars were ambassadors of the King of Spain, technically. Francisco Tello sent a picture. And the local ruler, that's the Kampaku, that's Hideyoshi, Toyotomi Hideyoshi, he complained about the fact that in the picture, the governor was holding this stick. He was offended. He said, this is not something to present, because in Japan, if you see the pictures when they depict the militaries, they never show the weapons. They're always dressed like, they're dressed in the court dress. Is a specific dress, is a traditional dress that the militaries too were using in these situations. They didn't show the sword. So it's interesting, this baston de mando was not the proper depiction of the governor. And at the same, but we read in Toyotomi Hideyoshi's reply that he saw this picture was like the governor himself coming to Japan, which reminds us to another topic of this meeting. That's the idea of how the Governor General represented, embodied the King of Spain, which is a topic that has been studied, especially for the Portuguese Empire, how the Viceroy of Goa was embodying the prerogatives of the King of Portugal, King of Spain, depending on the moment. Then we move on to Guillaume. And Guillaume, I know your work about the sangleyes, and you gave us some very interesting points on the petitions given by the sangleyes, and how the sangleyes were, why did the sangleyes were petitioning the king. I just have a comment on this, because being part of, this is related to the system of vassalage, because in diplomacy, the Spanish were following this approach of this friendship relationship, but there was a hierarchical system in East Asia, and in the case of the petitions, when the Chinese declared themselves vassals of the King of Spain, they were allowed to send a petition. They were allowed to talk to the king somehow, without being recognized as a vassal. They couldn't do it. They had to send they had to use mediators somehow. And this is another reason why so many warlords, local lords, how to say, the daimyo in Japan, they were willing to turn themselves into vassals. This is not something that was probably said by the warlords. I want to be a vassal, because it's not written anywhere in Japanese, but we don't have letters about the daimyo. We have few letters, but they don't, not about declaring themselves vassals. But generally, this idea was translated to let them become vassals and be part of the, and for trading reasons too. And this thing is connected to the idea of the translation. And interpreters, did they translate in the right way? How translation was managed, because translation, but who did the translations? For example, translations in Manila didn't work when they had to send a proper translation to China or Japan. They generally relied on the locals. And most of the time, letters in Japan were translated by the Jesuits, because the Jesuits had knowledge. They had, the Jesuits accommodated themselves to the culture. They studied the language. And this is something that the missionaries in the Philippines did very, they were not quick in understanding this, but the Dominicans started to approach the language in a different way in the beginning of the 17th century, quite late, when they realized that the local vernaculars were not working. The first translations were like the works of Juan Cobo, language studied by Benavides, and a lot of them was not the language they needed to enter China. Then Elsa CLAVÉ, she introduced us to the Malay world, to the Malay peninsula, and she made it clear, she drew attention to the fact that the creation of the borders, let's say the state, what we define as a state, with the borders in a European, from a European perspective, was not the work, let's say, of the British, but it was done before by locals, by the Malays. After an introduction, she pointed out to the fact that there's no reference in the Malay texts on land, on superficity, or even to the borders. And she indicated, in one last comment, that the term negiri stands for the river system. It doesn't refer to the borders of a state, but to the river system was the state. And then, of course, if people moved, then the border moved too. And then she gave us several examples on documents. The first one, the Surat Sungai. She gave some examples, and on other documents written in Malay, on agreements, the perjanjian, local agreements, etc., on how, basically how and all these documents were written in Malay. And then the last but not least, Eberhard CRAILSHEIM gave us a very detailed account of this case history on the Sulu zone. I liked a comment of I think it was one governor of the Philippines about Sulu, called an ambulant republic, and I think this could be related to let's say to nomads of the sea too, because but they were moving like nomadic republics somehow. And well, this is Eberhard talked about the diplomatic contention. We just discussed about this. I think I don't want to be too long, especially with my comments. I would like to thank everybody for inviting me today. It was a great pleasure. 2 days of very, very detailed information about diplomacy, cultural exchange. It was a pleasure to be here. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ubaldo, for your conclusions. And well, we are almost done. I want to thank you, Elsa and David, for being there. I think you are our heroes, definitely. And then also I want to thank all the public here, and on behalf of Paola and Guillaume.
Sorry, I need to know this is...
Oh, you want to add something?
No, I need to.
Oh, okay.
I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry because this is about my agenda. I didn't mention David. Yeah, because I messed up with the abstracts because I didn't have his abstracts. David presented another case study, very focused and very interesting and inspiring about the Piñal episode. This is one very important episode when Luis Das Mariñas went to, well, the Spanish were involved in the Cambodian War, as he explained to us. And then Das Mariñas ended up in Piñal, close to the Chinese coast, near Guangzhou, as the area of Hong Kong, basically. And he explained how they started negotiations with the local authorities at the local level. And what kind of gifts they exchanged. Especially I was impressed by the fact that they were exchanging animals, or probably I didn't understand that it was perros, they exchanged dogs. And then of course they needed comida to survive because the Portuguese wanted to expel them. And that was a very detailed study on a very complicated topic. Thank you. I was just wanting to add this.
Now we are done. Well, thank you very much, all of you, again. And Guillaume, you want to add something?
Sí, quería terminar por agradecer a Alexandre COELLO por la acogida, porque sé que siempre es un trabajo de organización, y sí, por el apoyo de su universidad, de su centro de investigación, que sé que colabora mucho con la Casa de Velázquez y ahora con la Escuela Francesa de Extremo-Orient y mi universidad, la de Toulouse. Y agradezco también mucho a los ponentes, como se dice aquí, ponentes, communicants, y por estar presente y fue súper interesante. Solo quería, no somos todos aquí, pero decir la idea del proyecto, ¿no? Que era de vernos, de compartir lo que estamos haciendo. Está bien a veces vernos sin la idea de utilitarismo productivo académico, pero sé que es importante también para las carreras y el sueldo, pero no, la idea era más de tomar el tiempo, de presentar su trabajo, con la idea de cerrar el proyecto con un encuentro más formal y ceremonial, con ¿cómo se dice? Gifts, para mí, por supuesto. Sí, regalos y todo esto, y el pregón, y el palo, etc. Pues yo estoy pensando el próximo año, 2025 o 2026, porque puede ser un poco más tiempo, y un poco la idea era presentar, se los digo después, demasiado tarde, no sé, presentar su trabajo ahora para volver a trabajarlo y que se vuelva una presentación de coloquio y tal vez una publicación si queréis. Es más o menos la idea. Había al principio del proyecto un grupo, pero vamos añadiendo nuevos compañeros, así que pues sí, la idea es más o menos esta, con campos de investigación diferentes. Creo que sí, que la presencia de Elsa o Pierre Emmanuel es importante para tener otras perspectivas. Somos muy de Filipinas, pero hay otros mundos y creo que son mundos vinculados o que se pueden comparar, y por eso es importante teneros. Gracias. Es todo, creo.
Pues sí, es todo. Pues muchas gracias de nuevo y bueno, hasta pronto.
Merci.